Hello, puppies and kittens.
Aww.
Yeah. Welcome back to another episode of Blasphemers Bible, and we are once again joined by Dr. Kill. At last, we meet again.
Are we
There he
actually
is.
live? Mine still says it's scheduled.
That it never
Oh,
says
is
it's live.
Reload.
really?
I
Okay.
have mine on
Yeah.
my YouTube on my phone.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know.
So,
Wow.
and do we need any kind of a prequel, a description of what we're about to read, like we had before?
Hopefully, we'll finish Judges.
Oh yeah. Let's fucking hope, right?
Yeah, we should.
Yeah.
We should finish.
Well, let's just jump into it then. And who's reading today?
Wait, I think
Well,
Isaac has an
Wait.
introduction.
Isaac did have a
prepared.
thing.
Yeah, I did have
Yes.
something I wanted to bring in. I mean, it could have been an introduction to the previous chapter, but we've already read the previous chapter, and so I just want to mention some things in that, and also some things we're going to read. And this is about. We've already talked about how the previous story is very similar to the story of Sodom, and how it's we can see the parallels, and the people who wrote the story were definitely they were basing it on that story. But there are some other things that we're going to read later in not the next book, because in the Christian Bible, the next book is Ruth, but in the Jewish Bible, the next book is Samuel. So if you were to read Samuel, you would see some stuff which actually is connected to this story, which is the last story in Judges. And in order to make that argument, we need to look at the story at the beginning of Samuel, which most people know as the birth story of Samuel, which is where his mother is barren, and she goes to the temple and she's praying, and the high priest thinks that she's drunk because she's like praying without speaking out loud and whatever, and then she has a baby, and that baby is Samuel the prophet. And the thing is, there's a very high probability this story was originally written about Saul. So and this is based on the language used, especially the Hebrew words that are used about the naming, right? It says Hannah named him Samuel because, and then it says a whole line about she named him Samuel because I borrowed him from Yahweh. And the Hebrew word for borrowed is, the root of that is sha'al. It can also mean to ask a question. So and the name Shaul
I really want to counter this, but I think when we'll get to
Samuel,
Samuel,
I'm not saying this is definitely.
I think you should let
high probability.
finish the thing.
Yeah, let me finish this.
Okay,
yeah,
sorry.
So more or less, if you look at the language about the naming, right, we have Samuel or Shmuel in Hebrew, which normally means more like God hears, and then it says, oh, I'm going to name him Shmuel because of. And then the whole line where it's like, I asked of him, and now I have loaned him to Yahweh. For as long as he lives, he is lent to Yahweh. These words for both request, ask, and loan all are based on the same root, Shin, Aleph, Lamed, or Sha'al, and which is more similar to the name Shaul, and especially actually the last word, he is lent to Yahweh. The passive way of saying this verb, like he is lent, is also literally pronounced the same way as the name Shaul or Saul in the Bible. So there is a strong argument to say that this story was originally about Saul, and then later on, probably like a pro-Davidic element would have changed the story to refer to Samuel instead. So once we have that, and the way we see this story is probably about Samuel, we can see some other things about this story that relates to our story. So in the story about Samuel, which might be Saul, we know that they came from the town of Ramah, or Ramatayim. And that town is mentioned in the past chapter as well, because it says, oh, let's go to Gibeah or Ramah. And both of these places are associated with Saul, or in the modern text, Samuel. And Bethlehem of Judah is associated with David. And so we can see that sort of almost like a polemic against these places that are associated with Saul. There's also bits about the story like, why is it a concubine, not a wife? And that could possibly be that, this to allude that this story is not about some random Levite, but it's actually about Saul. So he has a concubine, which is more of like a, kind of mostly kings would have had concubines. And also, if the birth story is actually referring to Saul, then that would make Saul, according to that version of the story, that would make him a Levite from Ephraim, which is the same as our main character. So it's almost like the person who wrote this knew both of these stories and combined both elements. He's both mentions the Ephraimite connection and the Benjamite connection. It's what was the other thing? There was one more thing, which is the also Shiloh is associated with Saul, and also the place where they got the girls from. Did we read this already? This will be in the next chapter. We're going to read about about the whole war and stuff, and there's going to be a bit where they kind of feel bad about killing all the Benjamites, so they want to get them some wives, and there's a whole bit related to another town, and this town is also related to the story of Saul. So maybe
I'm wondering if there is if there are other roots that are used like just as frequently in maybe this story, and then a different part of the text where it's not the Samuel story. So I'm wondering if this is like a case of confirmation bias.
Right. If you want to find something that actually is related in text, so there is a story about that place that's going to come up in the next chapter is called Yavesh Gilad, which is a place in Gilead, which is on the other side of the river. It's just randomly it comes up in the story. We mention these town people, and they become part of the story. Now there's a story about Saul and those people, and the language is very similar to the bit at the last verse of the last chapter. So in that one, we have he took his knife and took his concubine and cut her up into 12 pieces, and he sent them throughout the territory of Israel. And in 1 Samuel 11:7, it says that Saul took a yoke of oxen, which I guess is two oxen, and cut them into pieces, which he sent by messengers throughout the territory of Israel. The language is very, very similar. So if you wanted a textual connection, that would be it.
I mean, it's it's an interesting connection in the language. It wouldn't be the first time a polemic is written up and adapted to include someone that someone else wants to basically shit on. I made the point when we were talking before the show that with the urge to put forward, especially Josiah, because he's a freaking kid, on the throne of David, they have to make a big deal about the king being chosen of God and anointed and generations, promises, yada yada yada, divine right of kings kind of thing. But David was also well known to be the second king and to have usurped Saul. So you have to also undermine his descendants' claim to divine authority and kingship and all the rest of it. So you get the narrative of the second son that we see all throughout the Bible, where it's very important that the laws of carrying on authority and power and inheritance are carried out, but it's always the second that gets priority. It's always the usurper that gets. It's very strange, and it's a trope all through the scripture, and I think that's probably the reason why.
Okay. So one last thing, which is just when we look at the story of Sodom and this story, and we see what was connected, what's different, what's the same. There's one of the things that makes it stand out to us is this is being a copy. This is reliant on the story of Sodom, and that's the older story. Is, for example, in the story of Sodom, there's two daughters, right? And they're important to the story because they're the ancestors of these people, right? The whole story is about them being these two daughters. But in our story, we have the old man goes and he's like, oh, here is my virgin daughter and this concubine. The virgin daughter isn't important in any way to the story. and it's an element that is written into the story to give it more, to make it more similar to the other story, right? So if we look at the story in total, there are other elements that they don't really make any sense in context, but like there are
It never
additional
even
elements to the
says whether
story.
they threw the virgin daughter out. You assume they only sent out
Yeah.
the concubine.
Right, it says he seized his concubine and threw her out. Like the man took his concubine and pushed her outside. And the old man's daughter is like not mentioned at all in the story. It's just an element. We know that element is only there to make it align more with the two daughters of Lot. Now, if we go throughout the rest of the story, there's a few things that come up for no reason. Like they're not part of. It doesn't add to the story. One of those is let's stay in Ramah. What is that? What's the point of that? I mean, you could even say the whole bit about Jebus or Jerusalem. Why does that come up? That could just be, Jerusalem's David's town or whatever. Ramah is one of Saul's towns. And then there's another one which is like, oh, I'm on the way to the house of the Lord. What does that mean? Right? Why do they need two different places to get girls from at the end of 21? So it gives them both Yavesh Giva, Yavesh
Gilead.
Gilad and Shiloh.
Shiloh.
So it's like it doesn't really make. If you're just going to say the story, you don't have to have these extra elements that don't add anything to the story. And this theory is like, well, that it also explains why these extra elements even exist in the first place in the story.
Yeah.
All right, that's it.
So, who's reading today?
Well, see, I had a blast reading last time, so I think someone else should do it because, like, the thing is, the importance of the this Benjaminite War, right? I mean, it's kind of a big deal. I get it, but reading about it is also kind of boring. Last time I
guess
did it.
I never read a book of Judges, so maybe I'll read it.
Oh, did you? Are you really not?
No,
I
don't
think.
I did.
Lilith, do you want to read one of the chapters 2021?
I mean, Aaron always
I
gets
could
to read
read
the second
If
chapter.
you guys are...
So
I think, yeah, you know what? You read 20 and I'll fight with Aaron for 21.
Who is you?
All right,
Who is
wait.
you?
We're doing 20 and
Yeah. So
20 and
we
21.
only have
Tomer is 20.
we only have the two chapters.
Yes.
Yep, those are the
Okay.
last two in Judges, and then we're off to Ruth. And actually,
All right. Well,
sorry,
then
one more thing I did want to note. So it's actually kind of interesting, Isaac, that you're talking about this being, you said that this was an anti-Samuel text.
Saul.
Anti-Saul.
Anti-Saul. Okay, I misheard them.
The bit about Samuel was just there is a bit. The story in Samuel about Samuel's
The first
birth
chapter.
is possibly about Saul's birth. And
Okay,
it was
gotcha.
changed to become about Samuel.
Okay, gotcha.
I'm
Then never
personally
mind. Then what I have to
changed
say
it.
doesn't matter. Okay.
I'm personally
I
not
guess I'm
convinced
still
by.
in.
Yeah,
I
I mean,
I'm
I'd
not
be interested to
convinced by
hear
the
what
theory.
the argument against that bit is.
Yeah.
But I guess we can wait until we get to Samuel.
Yeah, I guess I'm still in last week because I was thinking we had 3 chapters, and I forgot we'd already read 19, and so we've only got 2 left. But I mean, I could read the first one and let Lilith take the second.
No, Tomer's reading chapter 20, and then you two argue about chapter 21. Lilith and Aaron.
Let's get through
argue.
20 first.
Yes.
Okay, so I'll read up. I'll read up to 23, including 23. Thereopon, I'm reading the JPS 1985 version. Thereupon, all the Israelites
what
from
I
Dan to yeah, because it's Safaria.
Yeah,
I have
no,
the
actually,
2023 version because I'm woke.
It's on my
Of course you are.
accordance.
All right, before
Okay.
you get started, then Eric
Okay.
Wander gifted 1 RNR membership, and then Matt White says, Tomer and Isaac, so there's no cognate between Samuel and Samuel, Lightbringer, in Hebrew, or
Yes,
so I've been told.
there
No.
is no connection because Samuel is Shmuel, which is like listen, God or whatever,
It
and
depends.
Samael is, I think it's written with a samach. I'm not sure
Yes.
what the meaning is. That Lightbringer.
That
I
is
guess?
an all
Sama means to blind, if I remember correctly, right?
Uh,
Sama.
So the blinder of God.
No, yeah, I remember Sama
Yeah.
being like, I mean, yeah, I
Or
guess.
God blinds? I don't know.
Yeah. The problem is that in
Yeah,
English,
He does
the
do that a
both of
lot.
them. The problem is that in English they both begin with Sam, but in the Hebrew it's Shmuel, which is like Shema, like to hear,
Mhm.
Yeah.
listen, and the other one is Sam. Is it with a Sama, a Sama?
Okay, so I'll start. Thereupon all the Israelites from Dan to Beersheba and from the land of Gilad marched forth, and the community assembled to a man before the Lord at Mitzpah. All the leaders of the people and all the tribes of Israel presented themselves in the assembly of God's people, 400,000 fighting men on foot. The Benjaminites heard that the Israelites had come up to Mitzpah. The Israelites said, "Tell us, how did this evil thing happen?" And the Levite, the husband of the murdered woman, replied, "My concubine and I came to Gibeah of Benjamin to spend the night. The citizens of Gibeah set out to harm me. They gathered against me around the house in the night. They meant to kill me, and they ravished my concubine until she died. So I took hold of my concubine, and I cut her in pieces, and sent them through every part of Israel's territory. For an outrageous act of depravity had been committed in Israel. Now you are all Israelites. Produce a plan of action here and now." Then all the people rose as one man and declared, "We will not go back to our homes, we will not enter our houses. But this is what we will do to Gibeah. We will wage war against it according to lot. We will take from all the tribes of Israel 10 men to the 100, 100 to the 1,000, and 1,000 to the 10,000 to supply provisions for the troops, to prepare for their going to Geba in Benjamin, for all the outrage it has committed in Israel." So all the men of Israel, united as one man, massed against the town. And the tribes of Israel sent men through the whole tribe of Benjamin, saying, "What is this evil thing that has happened among you? Come, hand over those scoundrels in Gibeah, so that we may put them to death and stamp out the evil from Israel." But the Benjaminites would not yield to the demand of their fellow Israelites. So the Benjaminites gathered from their towns to Gibeah in order to take the field against the Israelites. On that day, the Benjaminites mustered from the towns 26,000 fighting men, mustered apart from the inhabitants of Gibeah 700 picked men. Of all this force, 700 picked men were left-handed. Every one of them could sling a stone at a hare and not miss. The men of Israel, other than Benjamin, mustered 400,000 fighting men, warriors to a man. They proceeded to Bethel and inquired of God. The Israelites asked, "Who of us shall advance first to fight the Benjaminites?" And the Lord replied, "Judah first." So the Israelites arose in the morning and encamped against Gibeah. The men of Israel took the field against the Benjaminites. The men of Israel drew up in battle order against them at Gibeah. But the Benjaminites issued from Gibeah, and that day they struck down 22,000 men of Israel. Now the army, the men of Israel, rallied and again drew up in battle order at that same place as they had on the first day. For the Israelites had gone up and wept before the Lord until evening. They had inquired of the Lord, "Shall we again join battle with our kinsmen, the Benjaminites?" And the Lord had replied, "March against them."
Yeah. What?
So I
Is that what you're
the
finishing?
Oh, yeah, until
he
yeah,
said
verse
he was
23.
getting through 23.
Yeah.
So the one thing that I do kind of like about this, just because it's kind of quirky, is the the reference to the left-handedness. Now we've gotten that before in Judges, and we
Ehud.
get
What's interesting is the language used isn't they were left-handed. It says they had shriveled right hands.
Yeah, that's the
Oh,
exact
okay.
same description. Yeah, that's the exact same description used by Ehud to Ehud, describing his
Oh,
left-handedness.
oh yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
So it's the same as what you said.
Yeah, I
before.
think we get that
was
in
a couple
First
of episodes
Chronicles
again.
too.
It depends on who you ask, honestly.
What I
it
like
could
is
also
where you have these thousands of people or hundreds of people, however many, I forget the number, where they all amass as one man. So
Yeah.
that would be like one man made of all these other men, and it must be like 400 feet tall.
Well, it's
It's like
Oh my goch, it's like the robot
Transformer,
with the,
right?
Transformer. No, more like with the Power Rangers with their mechs
Yeah,
all
yeah.
come together and
They were just
yeah.
they were just made up of they were just a cloud of bees.
no, it's interesting.
For the man.
If you're saying so, what this actually says is they had shriveled right hands. Yeah, that has a lot of different connotations, I would say.
But it's supposed to be an innuendo, I guess, for being left-handed, which is weird.
No, I mean I get that. Obviously, I get it.
How's
But
it
like,
an innuendo?
but like I understand how it means they're left-handed, but at the same time, the significance of the right hand in biblical texts, usually it's God's right hand. That's the important one. But
Or the kings.
I'm not sure how often it pops up for randos. So
the right hand is supposed to represent justice and might, probably.
Well, the thing is, the person at your
kindness.
right hand is like that's the person that has been bestowed like right or power over something. I think
this is verse 16, right?
Yes.
Where's the shriveled right hand?
Ter yad yamino.
Yeah, I mean it could.
Ter
mean-
yad
what else could it
yamino.
mean?
Yeah.
Ter can also
guess.
mean like
Bound or shut up.
like-
Yeah, I discussed this already.
So
chapter 3.
iter is as possibly shriveling.
Possibly, it can also mean like shut up or bound, according to BDB dictionary.
Oh, so not working. It ain't working.
But it can also mean ambidexterity.
Impeded. See, this is, and I think within the context of the rest of verse 16, it seems to me like it probably refers to ambidexterity. Ambidexterity. That's the word, right?
Yeah, and I have a comment on this when we'll get to that.
I mean, I don't know exactly what the benefit of having left-handed slingers is.
But there definitely is a benefit to being ambidextrous, though.
That's true. Then why would they imply their right hand?
They can strike a hair with a stone, right?
Yeah,
they're pretty good.
Yeah. They're very good. Well,
And
it's the same reason. It's the same
they're
reason
all
Count
Hawkeye.
Dooku has that unusual tilt to his the handle of his lightsaber. He's a master duelist in part because with that tilt, everyone misjudges where he's going to strike next.
Man.
Yeah, that might be it. But I feel like if you're slingers, your what's the word? Long range units. I feel like it wouldn't really
but
make
if you're
a
going with the
difference.
left hand, like you think about where you're placing the slinging group.
Now I have to look this word up in a more serious dictionary.
Halot.
No, I'm looking it up in T-Dot.
T-Dot.
You don't know T-Dot? That's the Theological Dictionary of the Old Testament. It's like 15 volumes.
Oh no. But look
I
it
love
up.
how every word in the Bible has like a lot of meanings.
A million meanings, right?
Yeah, because
but is it?
I don't know about Hebrew, but at least for Greek, the language is so fluid.
But is it because
it's because the Greek came first.
Oh, okay.
Translated.
Not getting into
from because there's 1.5 million words in Greek, and there's only 8,000 words in Hebrew. So
fucking actor.
There is one opinion
for everyone that didn't get it.
One guy.
He's being facetious.
I would.
Yeah,
there
I
was
think
one
I got
guy.
that.
There was one guy in the Talmud who opined to that that the language before Babel, the language of the angels, is Aramaic.
Of course it is.
Rather than Hebrew, which is interesting.
The angels speak my language.
I'm going to read a couple of comments while Kip is looking that up. Eric Wander says, I love the fact that in Judges 20:4-5, the Levite tells the Israelite a slightly different story. He forgot to mention that he was the one who gave them his wife to be gang raped. Yeah, just leave out that important detail.
He also didn't say that he was the target of the rape request. That
See,
doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it's so obscure. Of course, it doesn't come up in T dot, but
It does come in
they,
Halot.
it does come in Halot, and Halot also says the Septuagint translates amphoterodaxios, which you recognize as ambidextrous. Right?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
And then Eric Wander continues saying, also, it's funny that the only time that God intervenes in this whole story is when there is a war. God be like, did someone mention war? Let's fucking go. And then
Yep.
one last comment from Eric Wander says, by the way, God has a really stupid way of doing war. He knows that the first two battles are going to fail, yet he still sent Judah to fight. He sent 40,000 soldiers to die for what?
For the old
Uh,
college try.
It's not God's fault. He just loves blood sports too much. We just have to come to terms. That's his interest, and
That's
whatever.
actually why Dr. Kill is here today.
So
Yes.
on this issue of Iter, like First Chronicles 12 verse 2.
Yeah.
Speaking of the Benjamites too, right? It says they were armed with the bow and could use both right hand and left hand to sling stones or shoot arrows. With the bow, they were kinsmen of Saul from Benjamin. So clearly, and I don't know. I guess it depends on what you're talking about in terms of the dates of these texts. But by the like the late Persian period or the mid Persian period, they certainly thought this was ambidexterity.
Mm-hmm.
That's all.
Okay.
But we haven't even started Tomer's commentary yet. I don't.
No, because there's
Well,
one
hold
more
on. I've
comment
got another
left.
comment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So then we have Satan 616 who says, why would the man cut the concubine into pieces? Wouldn't the desecration of a body be forbidden?
That's the point.
Yeah, but those are just rules.
No, that's the point. It makes the Levite look more bad. Like
Everyone's just an asshole in that story.
Yeah. At least
Yeah.
in my opinion. But also to compare it with the act of Saul in I don't remember the exact
Yeah, that's
passage,
why I
maybe
mentioned.
First Samuel 7:13.
I'll give you
I wanna say.
the one I read out was it's later on. It's in where is it? Oh yeah, here. 11:7.
Okay.
First Samuel 11:7.
Yeah.
First Samuel
Okay.
11:7.
Yeah, and I already discussed this in my commentary on Judges 19.
Well, I wasn't here for that.
Of course you weren't. So I'll start on.
Well, the main reason in the story is to shock the tribes into gathering for war.
And I do think it is an interesting parallel with the time that Saul cut up an ox, which is far less fucked up than cutting up your wife, to send the pieces as like a call to war. I don't know if that was.
I think Samuel's message though, which he adds. So there's a message in 11:7. It continues. Whoever does not go out after Saul and Samuel, thus will be done to his oxen. So it was a threat. And the fact that there's no, we don't get an accompanying message in our one.
I mean, it sounds similar to the trope of calling down a curse on yourself. The Lord do so more to me or such to me and more also if I am false in this, whatever it is. That's used as a trope in Ruth. It's used as it's sort of one of those things you say when you take vows.
Okay, so I'll start my commentary. First, on verse 2, 400,000 men. This number is absurdly high. In view of this, Butler notes that some commentators translate elef, 1,000, to mean a military unit, and thus 400 units of men. Others, like Younger, see it as a hyperbole. He notes Guillaume's claim, quote, such a demographic density was never reached in Benjaminite territory before the 20th century CE. These numbers are therefore historically what?
You're talking about the 400,000,
Yes.
Yeah.
but that's not Benjamites. That's the whole of Israel besides Benjamin.
Wait, I didn't say the Benjaminites, did I?
You literally just
Benjaminite
said
territory. Benjaminite territory.
Yeah,
Wait a minute.
I mean that would be.
No, I thought the Benjamites had 26,000.
Yeah, they had 26,000. So
So
Wait a
that
minute.
even sounds too much maybe for them.
No,
I'm
no.
just-
That's what he says. That's in the quote.
Okay, maybe he misread
So-
it. Okay, keep going.
No, I don't think it did because it continues. Such a demographic density was never reached in Benjaminite territory before the 20th century CE. These numbers are therefore historically unreliable, but they clearly convey the rage and hatred of the editors against their Benjaminite neighbors.
Yep. So I got to point out that this confusion in the word elef, which means thousand, but can mean troop or tribe or clan, is very frequently employed by Christian apologists as a means to wiggle out of the many historical implausibilities of something like an actual exodus out of Egypt.
Yeah, I do remember reading Sarna's explanation of that, but it
Right.
totally makes sense that they would, seeing those big numbers, that they would be like, well, maybe it means something else. Maybe it means
Yeah, exactly.
the other meaning. Yeah.
Yeah, 600,000 fighting men means that there were 600 units of what's
Right.
realistic. I guess 2.
I forget
Yeah,
what did he say. Did he say there were units of 9 or something like that? I forget the.
I don't-
Oh, that's you.
I don't remember, but the defeater to this claim, at least insofar as the Exodus stuff is concerned, is the census. As soon as you get to the census, in numbers, and they're very precise about this because everyone has to pay a half shekel tax to the temple, or sorry, to the tabernacle, to Yahweh, and they're based on the numbers of the half shekel tax that come out. It's absolutely not possible to see these as anything else but
Right.
straightforward numbers applied to the people and to the fighting men. So I tend to think this is probably what's going on here too. That this is, I would agree. Was that younger, Tomer?
No,
who
that's
said that.
Butler notes that some commentators translate it that way.
Yeah, but I tend to think that's like this is the hyperbole here is intended to
Yeah, that like Younger says.
enforce that. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what
general
it's
rule,
right.
extra 0.
I mean,
Yeah.
these aren't.
There you go.
Fair
I don't
enough.
think these numbers are. I don't think these numbers are that absurd. Because if they're only if there's 26,000 for one tribe, and 400,000 for the other 11.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
I have to
For
share
every
this
single
because
fighting man to join, maybe.
I
just
have to
don't
share
know.
this because the joke is so bad.
Oh.
Sterling Nash said the Vegemites were toast in that battle.
Ah,
Yeah.
no, I'm getting a rolled up newspaper next time and just whacking
Mhm.
that Nash.
Bit of
No,
temporality.
it's funny because exaggerating numbers to be all dramatic and vindictive against the people you hate wouldn't be that surprising, or in ancient literature or any other kind of literature, if you didn't have the fundamentalist evangelicals. That very word is exactly true, and if science approves, then it's the Bible proving science true kind of crowd. If they weren't so ridiculous in their interpretation, they wouldn't have nearly so many problems that they'd have to bullshit their way out of by being freaking dishonest.
Okay, I'll continue. Verses 4 through 5. In his report, the Levite emphasizes himself using first-person singular language, as if he is the main victim. He is omitting several details from the actual narrative. He does not mention the servant. He is referring to the sons of Belial, Belial 1922, as the men or lords of Gibeah, Ba'alei Giv'ah. He says that they intended to kill him, but in reality they wanted to have sex with him. He claims that they ravished his concubine until she died, but he omits that it was him who gave her to the mob. Niditch writes that his misrepresentation of the events, quote, contributes further to a negative portrayal of the Levite, end quote. And Butler comments, the Levite had shown no concern for his secondary wife and carefully avoided any mention of events that might incriminate him or call his character into question in any way. Bloch says, quote, he transforms an explanation of the events into a self-centered apologia, end quote. With all the questions we may raise about the sincerity and accuracy of the Levite's sole testimony, Wong reminds us, quote, the overall guilt of the Gibeathites in the rape and subsequent death of the concubine was not in dispute, end quote. Still, we must ask with Webb, quote, what will become of Israel when its assembly can be convened and used by a person of such dubious morals as this Levite, end quote.
Yeah, when Isaac was talking about the concubine in his introduction, I just did a search, and it's kind of interesting that like this is a word, pilegesh, which like it occurs a lot in Judges because of the story, right? But almost nowhere else in the entire Hebrew Bible. In fact, it never occurs anywhere between Exodus and Joshua. It only occurs 4 times in Genesis with reference to the concubines of Abraham and Jacob. It's used
the
several
word
times.
Pilegesh?
Yeah.
That's odd because I find various references to Pilegesh in other books. Or
Where?
are you talking about something else? Esther 2:4. Esther 2.
Oh
he's saying-
no,
he's saying
I'm not
in
there yet.
before
I'm not there
Joshua.
yet. So
Okay.
between Exodus and Joshua, it's never used. And then it appears again with some frequency in 2 Samuel, and of course these are all references to David's concubines. But and then again, just once more in 1 Kings, once more in Ezekiel, a couple times
Chronicles.
in Song of Songs,
Yeah.
once in Esther, a bunch of times in Chronicles. Not sure what those are with reference to, but yeah, never, not once in the entirety of all the legal material.
It's interesting.
Okay. Sorry.
No, it leans into the idea that there are polemic elements to this.
Maybe.
Either way.
But yeah.
Okay, I'll continue on verse 10, Gibeah. The Masoretic text and Peshitta read Geba. Nelson notes that the confusion between Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin in verse 4, and Geba, for example in 1 Kings 15:22, is common both in the biblical text and modern scholarship. He notes that some suggest that these may have been alternate names for the same place. He writes that Tel El Ful is the most likely site for Gibeah, and Jabba for Geba. Most early translations render Gaba, harmonizing with verse 33. Now on verse 12, the tribe of Benjamin. Hebrew Bible reads the tribes of Benjamin. This reading is favored by Targum, Butler, and Niditch. Traditional commentators like Rashi, Kimchi, and Abravanel, and some modern, like Bloch, wrote that tribes refers to families, mishpachot. However, most early translations render tribe of Benjamin. This reading is favored by Amit, Nelson, and Fernández-Marcos, the latter writing that the word shiftei, tribes in the Masoretic text, has been assimilated to the first shiftei in the first tribes of Israel. On verse 15,
Rashi tries to give it some prophetic fulfillment thing where he says that this is to do with so that Rachel has multiple tribes coming from her.
Yeah.
But...
yeah, of course he does.
And like each of the 10 families or clans within.
Didn't they already do that with Ephraim and Manasseh?
Yes.
Coming out of Joseph? Sorry.
Yeah.
Stop applying logic to apologize.
Oh no, so that 12 tribes would come out of Rachel.
Yeah.
So the 10 families of Benjamin, and then the two sons of Joseph.
Yeah. Now on verse 15, According to this verse, the Benjaminites had a total of 26,600 troops. However, based on the Benjaminite losses in verse 35 and 46 and 47, they had 25,600 troops. What happened to the missing 1,000? Kimchi proposed that the 1,000 troops died in the first two battles. He also notes a midrash which states that the 1,000 troops fled to Rome and settled there.
Yeah.
Wait, there's a
That's
midrash
a
about
hell of a
There
stretch.
is, but the source is unknown.
What is the rest of the story? Do you know? Or
No, he basically says that there is a midrash which says that stuff, but there is no. But I couldn't find any reference to it.
that's so funny. It reminds me of the stories
Yeah.
of how like Jesus' cousin went to Ireland and married the queen or the
Yeah.
princess, and then the kings of Ireland are descended from him, and therefore
Or
related
his
to Jesus.
Yeah.
And
Kids moved to
and-
France, or Jesus himself apparently moved to and then died in Japan. There's a couple of different ones.
Yeah.
There's a
I mean, that's
variety.
that's the
it's
whole
just interesting
basis
to hear a
of
Jewish
Dan
version
Brown's
of the same
book, isn't it?
concept.
Well, yeah, Dan Brown's at least got the one. I don't think the Irish vibe, but definitely the kids.
No,
I
the
thought kids went to
French.
France.
The
yeah,
Irish
they
connection
went-
isn't Jesus.
Merovingian dynasty, right?
right.
So
And well, I mean, it was a popular saying in the Middle Ages. The Pope may be French, but Jesus Christ is English. They pretend he came to England too.
I think
Which,
that there's a
the
video.
Mormons ripped off. So
If you're interested in the Irish connection, there's a video by Useful Charts, which is a bit off topic for his channel, which talks about British Israelism, which was it's a movement similar to Mormonism, but centered in Britain, and it's about how the royal family is really related to Jesus, and then the British are the real Jews or something. It's kind of interesting, and they have a lot of weird apocalyptic like Christian ideas as well, and their artwork's pretty cool. They have a lot of these like monsters, like lions with 4 heads, or dinosaurs with like whatever. It's
weird
fun video.
interpretations of the Ezekiel
Yeah,
/
yeah, that stuff,
Revelation angels.
Yeah, I think that's what it is.
Whatever the fuck they
Revelation.
were.
Yeah.
Eldritch horrors, abominations.
Yeah, but I remember that being one that was like I think it was like a lion triceratops or something. I don't know.
Okay, I'll continue with I was half through my commentary. While the MT is preserved in the Peshitta and Targum, Alexandrinus and Vulgate read 25,000. 25,000 troops instead of 26,000 to assimilate with verses 35, 40. Sorry, with verses 35, 46, and 47. The Vaticanus has 23,000 for some reason. Amit writes that the discrepancy in the Masoretic text is part of the overall corrupt and problematic data of the story. Butler notes that preliminary and interim report follows MT, quote, seeing too narrow a text base for the emendation, which represents accommodation to a parallel passage. Now, on verse 16, we're left-handed. In Hebrew, iter yad yemino. This term is used to describe Ehud's left-handedness in 3:15. The term can also refer to ambidexterity, as in 1 Chronicles 12:2, a reading which is found in the Septuagint, Vulgate, and is preferred by Amit. She writes that the group is presented as an elite force of the Benjaminite army. Since they were ambidextrous, they had the advantage of using both hands equally, and so the attacked would not know where the stones would come at them. However, Peshitta, Targum, and most traditional and modern commentators read left-handedness. Niditch writes that the Benjaminites are often left-handed, either due to training or genetics.
if they're ambidextrous, it might explain why they kick their asses so bad.
Yeah, I mean,
Just go for the southpaw.
if you read chapter 3, then yeah, guess. So now on verse 18, Judah shall go first. Butler comments, as in 1:2, Yahweh answers that Judah will lead. The answer contains a bit of irony considering the location in Bethel. Thus, the men of Israel can claim divine sanction for their work, but divine sanction comes from the soon-to-be condemned sanctuary. Wang points out that the, quote, selection of Judah to lead the campaign against Benjamin seems puzzling, for in the immediately ensuing account of the war against Benjamin, Judah actually plays no distinguishable role from any of the other tribes within the Israelite coalition, end quote. However, Wong's further comment that this is present primarily as a link to chapter 1 is a bit stretched, since the oracle of verse 18 begins a string of 3 oracles here, with only the third one proving true.
Yeah. By the way, I just want to say, like, the whole this whole bit about them asking God and God telling them to go, and then they'd get defeated, and then they'd come back, and he says go again. The rabbis seem to be unanimous on on their point of view that this is because the way that they went about it. Instead of asking whether they should fight or not, they asked who should go first, and only once they, cry and mourn and bring sacrifices, then God's like, okay, I'll help you when you make me feel better about myself or whatever.
And my final comment on verses 22 to 23, several commentators like Amit and Nelson note that logically the events of verse 23 must take place before verse 22. Thus, English translations like NRSV and REB transpose between the verses. Fernández-Marcos notes that Jerome already sensed this difficulty by translating verse 23, quote, in such a way that they first ascended and wept before the Lord until night, end quote. He writes, however, that there is no textual basis for this transposition. Butler and Niditch preserve the MT.
Yeah, it looks like SBL transposes those verses.
Yeah, this is not the only place where there's a bit weird ordering. There's a bit where it says, and the Benjamites heard the Israelites. And then the next verse is like the Israelites talking to the Levite. So it's almost like it's like a whole bunch of verses in between two, like, and they heard and then they came to battle instead of, it's a bit weird. Yeah.
Oh, I'm done with this part.
See, I think I took the repeated inquiries as an escalation in terms of reinforcing what Yahweh requires of you, right? Like first they just pose the question. When they come back, then they're weeping and mourning, and then finally, they come back. They offer an olot, a burnt offering. They offer shalamim, peace offerings, and and then there's this mention of the Ark of the Covenant of God, right? So I wondered, and the priest too, yeah. So I wondered if there's some sort of cultic scolding going on here in the text too.
Yeah, one of the I was going to say quickly that one of the interpretations from the rabbis is that it was a punishment for the story before, for the story of the Micah's idol and Dan and whatever, since the Israelites didn't do anything about what had happened. The idol worship or whatever. It's Rashi.
Yeah.
You can see though why there would be a problem, because in this case they are in the right, and the idea that God will trial by ordeal, trial by battle, God will uphold the right person who's doing the right thing. It's a nice fantasy, it's not reality, but if you're actually basing your behavior on this genuine belief that the people who are in the right will be supported by God in battle, then you've got to wonder what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, there's also there's no bit where God commands them to, to kill everyone. They kind of kill everyone. I guess we can talk about that next chapter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so
but God did say to go to war. Sorry, God did say yes, go kill.
Yes, your soldier. Yeah, go
every time.
Specific about it. He's not like go in and kill every baby. But
I mean, we are to understand that when they inquired of God, and God said it's supposed to be like a lottery sort of situation, not like
Right.
it wasn't like a prophet or whatever. It was just like they used the Urim or something. They used some sort of divine, what's it called? Divining.
The bones said yes.
Divination. Yeah.
Divination, yeah. That works as well. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll continue. I'll finish this chapter. The Israelites advanced against the Benjaminites on the second day, but the Benjaminites came out from Gibeah against them on the second day and struck down 18,000 more of the Israelites, all of them fighting men. Then all the Israelites, all the army, went up and came to Bethel, and they sat there, weeping before the Lord. They fasted that day until evening, and presented burnt offerings and offerings of well-being to the Lord. The Israelites inquired of the Lord, for the ark of God's covenant was there in those days. And Pinchas, son of Eleazar of Aaron, the priest, ministered before him in those days. Shall we again take the field against our kinsmen, the Benjaminites, or shall we not? The Lord answered, Go up, for tomorrow I will deliver them into your hands. Israel put men in ambush against Gibeah on all sides. And on the third day, the Israelites went up against the Benjaminites as before and engaged them in battle at Gibeah. The Benjaminites dashed out to meet the army and were drawn away from the town onto the roads, of which one runs to Bethel and the other to Gibeah. As before, they started out by striking some of the men dead in the open field, about 30 men of Israel. The Benjaminites thought, They are being routed before us as previously. But the Israelites had planned, We will take to flight and draw them away from the town to the roads. And while the main body of the Israelites had moved away from their positions and had drawn up in battle order at Baal Tamar, the Israelite ambush was rushing out from its position at Ma'are Gava. Thus, 10,000 picked men of all Israel came to a point south of Gibeah, and the battle was furious. Before they realized that disaster was approaching, the Lord routed the Benjaminites before Israel. That day, the Israelites slew 25,100 men of Benjamin, all of them fighting men. Then the Benjaminites realized that they were routed. Now the Israelites had yielded ground to the Benjaminites, for they relied on the ambush which they had laid against Gibeah. One ambush quickly deployed against Gibeah, and the other ambush advanced and put the whole town to the sword. A time had been agreed upon by the Israelite men with those in ambush. When a huge column of smoke was sent up from the town, the Israelite men were to turn about in battle. Benjamin had begun by striking dead about 30 Israelite men, and they thought, They are being routed before us as in the previous fighting. But when the column, the pillar of smoke, began to rise from the city, the Benjaminites looked behind them, and there was the whole town going up in smoke to the sky. And now the Israelites.
Yeah, this is the God is love. This is God of infinite loving mercy and forgiveness. This is God is wisdom.
No,
Well,
man, this
technically
is
it's not
Yahweh.
God.
Yeah, this is Oh man, you know what it would? Oh man, I should have fucking said it. I was like, no, this is Patrick. That would have been a good line.
So I'll continue. And now the Israelites turned about, and the men of Benjamin were thrown into panic, for they realized that disaster had overtaken them. They retreated before the men of Israel along the road to the wilderness, where the fighting caught up with them. Meanwhile, those from the towns were massacring them in it. They encircled the Benjaminites, pursued them, and trod them down from Menucha to the point opposite Gibeah on the east. That day, 18,000 men of Benjamin fell, all of them brave men. They turned and fled to the wilderness, to the rock of Rimmon. But the Israelites picked off another 5,000 on the roads, and, continuing in hot pursuit of them up to Gidom, they slew 2,000 more. Thus, the total number of Benjaminites who fell that day came to 25,000 fighting men, all of them brave. But 600 men turned and fled to the wilderness, to the rock of Rimmon. They remained at the rock of Rimmon 4 months. The men of Israel, meanwhile, turned back to the rest of the Benjaminites and put them to the sword. Towns, people, cattle, everything that remained. Finally, they set fire to all the towns that were left.
And the moral of this story, boys and girls, is that if you're brave and that's a virtue, you're going to die. But he who fights and runs away lives to fight another day.
Well, and the only appropriate thing is to burn the
That's how I
town
live
and kill
my
everyone.
life.
I do think the one good lesson we could take from this is that it doesn't matter how righteous you think you are. If you go to war, you better get some fucking strategy, because God's not going to magic you just because you think you're right.
And that's the other thing, because God doesn't magic you. God says, I will deliver them into your hands. And what that means is you're going to do all the work.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of your people are going to die because, hey, I'm Yahweh. So I don't do shit. I let people die and take credit.
It was one of the things that always bothered me, even as a child, that I kept trying to push my parents to give me a decent answer on, was the idea that you have to thank God for all the good things, which I didn't have a problem with. But then you couldn't blame him for any of the bad things. And I'm like, no, you don't get thanks for all the good things if you don't take responsibility for any of the bad things. Well, no, you can't do that.
Sometimes you have to thank him for the bad things too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I remember that bullshit.
Yeah, when someone dies, Jewish people will say Baruch Dein Emet, which means blessed is the judge of truth.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that.
Yeah, and there's the idea that the bad thing is really a good thing. You just don't see how it is. And I was very enamored with a story from The Hiding Place, Corrie ten Boom. She hid Jews during the Nazis. You know the one with the fleas.
I know it.
Yeah,
They
she
made
and her
a movie
sister.
of it.
Yeah, well, she and her sister ended up in a concentration camp. They didn't catch the Jews. They were only they had got her on some other charges with regard to food stamps. Anyway, but her sister was like, we have to thank God in every circumstance. So they thanked God for, the good things in their situation, like being together. But then her sister insisted they should also thank for the fleas that, were all through their barracks, which she's like, I am not thanking God for a flea. Ew. And she's like, we have to do it. The scripture says. And then it turns out that they were able to have Bible study because the guards didn't like to come into the flea-infested barracks because ew. So, the bad thing was really a good thing. So you should thank God for every horrible thing that happens to you because it's really a good thing. You just don't see how yet.
This sounds like the logic of when there's, when a house fire kills everyone in the house.
Fun fact.
And one of the few things that escapes being burnt is the Bible. Miracle of Jesus.
Fun fact, I had a Christian on my show claiming that Corrie ten Boom was evidence that Christianity was true. I'm not kidding.
I will say that Corrie ten Boom is evidence that Christianity can promote ethical behavior in certain people who are probably already predisposed to it.
Yeah, it's like people can be good and people can be bad, but if you want good people to do bad things, then you need religion.
Christopher Hitchens.
Yeah.
Thank you, Christopher Hitchens.
Yeah. Oh, thanks for the.
No, Christopher Hitchens. I love this about him that he quoted people all the time. I do the same thing, but then I end up thinking all the quotes come from him, and they don't. But just smart man.
Is that one not his?
No, he was quoting. Fuck, who was he quoting? I cannot remember their name. He quoted a lot of people. That was a very well-read man.
That's true.
Steven Weinberg might be the original. Does that make sense?
Oh, wow.
I mean, something like it was probably said by Hume, but not.
With or without
those
religion, good
terms.
people can behave well and bad people can do evil. But for good people to do evil, that takes religion. Apparently, that's Steven Weinberg.
Is it Steven Weinberg?
Well, when I put in, it takes religion to make a good person, blah, blah, blah. The first thing that comes up is like Weinberg. Yeah, author of the first. Whatever. Okay.
Okay, so yeah, I'll start my commentary. First, on verse 26, Butler comments, fasting appears only here in the book of Judges and infrequently in the Hebrew Bible. It generally accompanies mourning ceremonies and is part of ritual self-humiliation or castigation designated by Hebrew anna. J.E. Hartley defines fasting as, quote, depriving the body of nourishment as a sign that one is experiencing great sorrow. A true fast had to indicate that the people were intent on seeking righteousness, which included taking care of the poor and needy, Isaiah 58, and compare Jeremiah 14:12 and Zechariah 7:5, end quote. R.J. Way notes, quote, fasting expresses self-abnegation in order to assert the reality of God and the imperative of his law, end quote. Burnt offerings involved the burning of entire animals on the altar. Leviticus 1 gives regulations for making such offerings. Its function and motivation seems to be complex and diverse, involving both atonement and invocation. Peace offering, in Hebrew shlemim, also eludes specific definition. P. Miller explains, quote, the two most conspicuous features of the Shelem offering are its consumption by human beings and its use on celebratory occasions, end quote. The offering here in Judges is, however, anything but celebratory. E. Merrill notes that, quote, the fellowship offering, sometimes called the peace offering, was a voluntary act designed not to achieve fellowship with the Lord, but to celebrate its reality, end quote. The three cultic observances, notes Wong, quote, seem to signal steps taken to restore damaged relationship with Yahweh, end quote. Brensinger says, quote, with two military defeats and God's disfavor, the presentation of both types seemingly reflects the Israelites' desire for forgiveness as well as acceptance, end quote.
It's fun actually with God. You don't need to know what you did wrong. You just need to grovel a lot because God loves to see you degrade yourself.
In a very relevant to what we were talking about before, there's a quote that says that they were thankful for the survivors of the first two battles. So they were like, "Oh, here's a thank offering."
God is such an asshole.
Now, verses 27
The
to
asshole
28.
at the center of the galaxy.
The supermassive black hole.
You done? Okay. Now on verses 27 to 28. So the comment is from in those days to ministering before it. Amit writes that this clause breaks the verse's continuity and indicates insertion of late editing. The first insertion, which mentions the ark, explains why they went up to Bethel. This insertion was needed to highlight the Israelites' positive behavior, who went to inquire of God at the ark, but also hints to the transfer of the ark from Shiloh to Bethel. She writes, quote, the later editor knew of the ark's chronology, according to which, from the days of Joshua until the war of Even Ha'ezer in 1 Samuel 4 and 5, the ark was at Shiloh. Therefore, he found it proper to highlight that in those days, the ark was in Bethel. The second insertion notes that Phinehas, quote, ministered before him in those days, end quote. The editor responsible for this insertion knew the end of the book of Joshua and knew of Phinehas, a third generation to the Exodus. Since he wished to connect the story with the statue of Micah, a Levite who was a third generation to the Exodus, he mentioned Phinehas, and by that he approved of the inquiry to God at the place where the ark was, under the supervision of Aaronite priests.
So do you think the idea that these two stories were actually took place earlier on is caused by these later edits, and you could place them as in chronological order after Samson, if not for these additions? Does that make sense? If we take,
I think
we'll have to see what the argument is for why they are put earlier in the story.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, she argues that these chapters are like post-exilic. I can't remember.
No. I mean the actual chronology of when the story is supposed to happen. I guess
The
the whole thing
internal
about
chronology.
Dan. Yeah.
I like
internal-
this comment from Iconicer. The numbers of people dying are giving me flashbacks to the Book of Mormon.
No, the Book of
Or-
Mormon has millions of people dying.
Well, hey, you know what? If we add shit up, those
it's
numbers
better.
will pile up. But
Okay, fair.
is it that, or is the Book of Mormon giving you flashbacks to the Bible? Because for me, I feel like I would go the other way.
Well, yeah, but I mean, they obviously read that part of the Book of Mormon first on the channel.
Because how often is it that there are battles involving hundreds of thousands of people, even at a time when we know, like, you know, the population of the entire country couldn't have been that much.
You know what? God does not lie, and he is not the author of confusion. So if you're confused, it's your fault, and you need to go pray and have faith and stop with all this questioning nonsense.
Well, you know what?
Except when God brags
lucky
that
for
he
Aaron,
is the
God didn't
author
write
of
this.
confusion.
It is interesting that there are less fighting men now than there were during the Exodus.
I'm sorry, I talked over
In the
Lawrence. What were you
internal
saying,
chronology.
Yeah, in the internal
Yeah.
chronology,
Yeah.
it's like this is supposed to be,
That's
whether
true,
3
right?
generations later or quite a bit later, and then
God,
there's
Yeah.
less of them.
from at the end of the Exodus or the beginning, because God offed a lot of people in the desert. He was throwing snakes and poisonous water.
Yeah, but he
and
didn't kill the
burning
children.
them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but most of those would have been adults who had already had their children. So I don't know if it would have affected necessarily the next generation. So it's like it's interesting that you've got like 600,000 men, which is like 1.5 million people in total, and then they're in the land, they're settling, they're doing this and that, and it's I don't know, 100 years later, maybe or maybe not, and it's like, oh, there's less people now.
Okay, I'll continue on verse 33. Baal Tamar. Targum and Rashi read the plains of Jericho. Amit writes that from the description of the war, some hypothesize that Baal Tamar resided east of Gibeah and south of Geba. Nelson argued that Baal Tamar would be west of Gibeah and south of Bethel. Butler notes Gass's opinion that this was a sanctuary for Baal and may only have been a worship place without a settled population. I mean, technically, it's Baal Tamar, if you want to be more precise on the Masoretic version, but...
Yeah, but it's the same spelling as Baal the god, right?
Yeah, but you don't have the dot in the bet, the gesh. You don't have that, so technically it's read Baal Tamar.
Yeah, but that's because, that you could just explain that by just because it's got a prefix in front of it. No, you wouldn't have
maybe, but if
Baal,
you want to, be more,
changes.
maybe, but if you want to be like more precise on the Nikud, then it's Baal. But no, it's I think it's Baal.
Yeah, but a lot of times when you have I can't remember what there's a word for it in English for these letters, they change whether there's a vowel in front or not. So for example,
Begad
you have,
Kafat letters.
Yeah, Begad Kafat, yeah. So yeah, so I don't see why Baal wouldn't become Baal when you put Ba in front of it. We don't have any examples of Baal.
Well,
anywhere else in the
that's
Bible, I'm sure.
that's how I learned how to use the gesh. Chastise me for it. I don't care.
That
God's servant offers $5 and says, Aaron Ra, the willing challenger. God bless, friend. Acts 2:38.
You always like to
Acts
nice.
2:38 is a verse about
It's repent
baptism.
and be baptized, I think, right?
Ew.
Yeah, something like that.
Why would I do that again?
Okay.
I think he
thought
just wants to see Aaron get into a pool of water naked. So.
Ooh, kinky.
Please don't. Okay.
Wow, Tomer, that was rude.
I mean, not on screen. Yes, we get that, but
my
like
opinion,
in his own home, don't tell him what to do.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. You all are filthy bastards. So, verse 33, west of Gibeah. In the Masoretic text has Ma'are Gava. Some traditional commentators like Rashi, Kara, and Ditrani derive Ma'are, from Erva, which means nakedness or uncovering. and read the naked part of Geba, i.e., the uncovered part where Geba was defenseless. Defenseless. Kimchi took
That's
the
fun.
root. Yeah.
I'm a prophet. I knew what
Yeah.
Tom was going to say, so I made little jokes.
Here's an interesting comment from Matt White. Says, Aaron, the largest assembly and deployment of a fighting force was D-Day, 1944, which is outnumbered by every fictional battle. Its logistics.
Yeah, that's true.
What was that number?
Like, the D-Day?
I
don't
suppose
think
we
it's
could
even
Google
that-
it.
Yeah, I can look it up. It's probably like a few 100,000.
So there were
I'll-
more of Tolkien brought more elves and men to fight Sauron.
133,000 from the United States.
See, that's already a fucking shit ton.
Whoa,
There's like
1.5
75
million.
people from Canada. Wow, eh?
And yet we
Like-
ended up ahead of everyone else. And they had to call us, be like, where the hell are you? And they told them, they're like, you're off the maps. You're too far ahead. Stop. We have to catch up.
Okay.
Okay, I'll continue. I'm still on that comment. Kimchi took the root Ein Resh He to refer to wetness, as in Isaiah 19:7 and Psalms 37:35, and writes that this location was close to Geba and was a meadow. Likewise, KJV renders the meadows of Geba. Alexandrinus has west of Geba, reading Ma'arav Geba. While this reading is favored by Amit and many modern translations, Fernández-Marcos notes Barthelemy's objections to this reading. One, the word Ma'arav, meaning west, first appears in poetry, seen in Psalms and Isaiah, and appears in prose only very late, in Chronicles and Daniel. In earlier prose, the west is designated by Yam. And two, the west of Gibeah would be too far removed from Gibeah, which is 5 kilometers, for setting up an ambush there in order to conquer the city suddenly. Instead, Barthélemy retains MT and follows Rashi's interpretation that Ma'are Geba refers to the side opposite the battle, left without protection by the defenders who have gone out against Israel. Likewise, Butler renders the unprotected side of Gibeah, and Nelson writes that this interpretation is certainly attractive, but preserves Ma'are Geba. Peshita renders the cave of Geba, reading Me'ara, and Targum reads the plain of Geba, reading Arava.
There's also an opinion, that it could mean a pasture or a
Yeah, that's
or
Kimchi.
even west.
Cleared field.
Yeah.
I said that, Isaac.
Oh,
You
sorry,
never
sorry.
listen.
I didn't
You
hear
never
that bit.
freaking listen to what I say.
Somebody get Tomer a gummy.
How many?
We actually have some really good comments here. I just want to see if the Eric Wander one is in the chat, because that actually is relevant to the dialogue.
Okay, so supercilious pseudonym offers $20, thank you, and says, why should Judah specifically suffer the frontal assault, and who interpreted God's decision?
That actually is a good question. I mean, obviously
It's very
the
ambiguous.
bones. Yeah,
Yeah,
the divination. But
This happened a few chapters ago too, where they received some word from God, but it wasn't very clear. But they interpreted it, positively. So it's sometimes unclear in the Deuteronomistic history whether or not God, who God is vying for, and I feel like sometimes he's obviously very especially once we get into the whole narrative about the Assyrians or the Babylonians, it's very clear whose side he's on. But when it's intercommunal relations between the Israelites, that's when it's all like, hey, we gotta leave it open to interpretation.
Yeah. It does say that they would I can't remember which verse it was, but they would dispatch against according to the lot. Was
Yeah.
that like
Yeah.
It's
Was
like
that
verse
9
2 or
10
something?
No.
And I can't help. I know you guys are probably going to judge me as cynical or for saying this, but I have the sneaking suspicion that when
Oh, it's not
God
personal.
tells you that somebody that tomorrow I will deliver them into your hands, I suspect that was written after the battle, not before.
Yes.
Yup.
The chances of this story actually happening in any form is like
Non-existent.
Right, yeah.
non-existent. Yeah. This
Yeah, I mean,
this is
Yeah.
At the
this
time,
is-
this would have been like, to explain maybe some
obvious
tensions
literature.
between the Benjamin Knights and everyone else. But yeah,
Yeah.
the thing that you're talking about, Arn, that has a name. It's called Ex Eventu. Ex Eventu prophecy.
Okay.
The other bit of the question, why Judah? It could just be to be like, oh, obviously Judah should go first because Judah is the royal tribe and whatever.
Keep in mind that
but the thing is
Go on.
The only problem is that they lose the battle, so you could think of it as almost as something against them, but I don't know if you have to read that or not.
Keep in mind that in chapter 1, verse 2, Judah also is sent first. There is another comment.
From Eric Wander, yeah.
Eric Wander says the strategy used to capture and destroy the town is identical to the one deployed by the Israelites against AI.
I.
In Josh
The heap
8.
of ruins.
Many scholars think that the writer in Josh drew on this story.
Yeah, that's the one where they like corner them between the two cities, right?
Yeah, I mean the
Yeah.
focus on this story isn't about like military tactics, so it makes sense that he would just copy a strategy that works in one story. I mean, I guess it's the only thing that adds to it is the whole like they attacked on the first day and they lost, and the second day they lost, and then the third day, it would work better this type of ambush because they thought they were winning, so they went beyond their means. But I guess that's similar to the I story as well.
You can use whatever tactic you want in battle against a heap of ruins, and it'll usually come out in your favor.
I wonder if
yes.
in any of these old battles, in these old biblical battles, did they secure the airports?
They secured the chariots of
Who
fire.
had air superiority during the Civil War?
That is important. It's very relevant. Well, really the question.
Well, one
is
of
settled.
one of those armies was the Confederate soldiers had pterodactyls, didn't they? I'm pretty sure I saw a picture.
And AK-47s. The difficulty was mounting the AK-47s on the pterodactyls.
Don't forget the fighter jets.
Okay.
I mean, Trump mentioned those, right? The airports. They had all of that.
That was my joke. Yep, that the Revolutionary War soldiers
I
secured
missed
the
that one.
airports.
Did he say that?
Yes.
He said that.
Oh god.
That's
Wait.
I
Hold on.
feel like we're diverging.
We
I'm
are,
sorry.
we are.
that's where I got
Don't
the
worry.
joke.
But
I
it's
agree.
good. It's okay.
We are. But
I need to hear this.
I need to know who the fuck said this? What?
Yeah, right.
Donald Trump said
What
It
did he
was
say?
stupid. It was
during the
Trump. What do you
Revolutionary
think?
War that like I guess it was George Washington's men that one of their battle strategies was to secure the airports.
Oh, it's a Revolutionary
When did
War.
he say that?
I got it wrong.
I can
You're
Google
thinking
it,
the Civil War?
Good God.
but I remember hearing him say it.
Oh,
But I'm glad my
God.
mistake. I'm glad my mistake reminded Dr. Kill of the.
Twitter got flooded with pretty good memes when Trump said that.
Why
For
did I
weeks.
miss that entire meme train?
I missed it because I'm in Canada.
I saw terrible maps. I saw terrible maps post a picture of a map of the United States where it was like the key just said like red dot is airfield during and then it was like at the top number of airfields during the Revolutionary War or something like that, and it's just a white shape of America without any red on it.
I love terrible maps.
Oh,
So funny. I think
Are you done?
they just have like they just released a book, I think, of a bunch of terrible maps. I know Vsauce did like a little short on it.
No. That's cool.
Can America?
He said that it was the Continental Army that took over the airports in the Revolutionary War.
Of course. How silly.
Wait, that was another cue, by the way,
Amazing.
for Thomas to make us share another meme, by the way. We did one. You need to do the other one now.
No,
83
Yeah,
Bongo has a
that's not
great
on protocol.
tu quo que
Thank you, Peter. I guess.
Okay.
response there.
Okay, go.
Yeah, okay. Now on verse 35, the Lord defeated Benjamin before Israel. Nelson writes that when verse 35 is reached, Yahweh is, quote, no longer merely the source of sacred war oracles. Now the divine warrior takes the field and wins victory, end quote. Butler writes, this ominous note adds a stern element to Israel's theology of warfare and punishment. God can use his own people to punish the deeds of a part of his people. It remains difficult to see how God was justified in inflicting such a decisive and destructive punishment on a people for the sin they committed. Still, that is a human way of thinking, prioritizing one type of disobedience as deserving greater punishment than another. We must always step back and let God define justice rather than trying to hold him accountable to our definitions of justice.
What
And
stupid evil-
I know I only included this just because I thought his comment there was not good.
Yeah.
in my
Who was
opinion.
saying this again?
Butler.
Butler. Okay.
Yeah, and I feel like Butler's
Butler.
previous comment about the numbers being off was also a badly written comment. So yeah.
I oh God, I don't want this to be true, but I have to say this. That kind of thinking is one of the ways in which you need to understand there is no evil to which the devoutly religious will not sink. There is no bottom. And this is one of the ways of thought that promotes it. As a child, I was told frequently that all sins are the same. Lying to mommy about whether or not you took the cake is the same as genocide, because these are both sins and you sinned against God, and those are infinite. And so these are the same thing. I was told this my whole life by various ministers, thankfully not by my parents because they're not fucking insane. But I have heard this hundreds of times in a religious context. It is a real theological position that has been held by an inordinate number of religious teachers and leaders for centuries, and it is the most fucking evil thing. I don't even know how to qualify it.
That's interesting. I didn't grow up with all sins are equal. I grew up with all like positive commandments are evil are equal.
No, I like the positive commandments are evil.
I did too. I was eager to see where you were going with that.
No, yeah, like the positive commandments are like the mitzvot are equal in the sense that, you know, honoring your father and mother is just as important to God as you know, whatever.
Well, they
bringing
even
a sacrifice.
even within evangelical context. I mean, one of the very first Hebrew words that I ever learned was tama, which means to sin or to miss, right? And this is built into the
Tameh.
Tameh,
yeah.
sin,
Like
yeah.
as in like
The
Sinful
verb is
or
tama,
kind of.
right?
Yeah,
So,
Tetmem
but
Aleph,
this is
sorry.
the yeah.
Ah.
So, but this is like within evangelical context, they capitalize inappropriately on this idea, right? That because tameh comes from the root tama, which also means just to it's used in this story, right? The Benjamites don't miss.
That one. Okay,
No, but
maybe
that's
it's
right?
Vayachtu. It's not from the same. It's not from the same
No,
root. It's chet tet aleph.
Oh wait, what am I?
You're saying
Right.
tet
Oh,
aleph.
chet means
It's
to sin.
chata.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, chata
that's
means
the one.
to
I'm
sin.
sorry, I
Yeah,
got them
yeah.
mixed up. Chata.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, chet.
So,
Chet is
but
to
it's
sin, yeah.
you know, and the message was always proclaimed loudly
No, it's not.
that the point is not the degree to which
Mhm.
you have missed. The point is that you've missed. Therefore,
Yes.
all sins are just missing. It's all there
What you're telling me is that
as
close only counts in horseshoes?
yes, or
Pretty much.
as what's his name
Very
from
interesting.
Talladega Nights
So there's
says,
no, but you
if
have
you're
unforgivable sins.
if you're
don't
not
you?
first, you're last. What's that?
Yeah, there you go.
What was
Doesn't
that?
Christianity have unforgivable sins?
Yes.
Yes, theologically, there's debate,
it's
but yeah,
yeah,
Jesus did say that.
it's fuzzy and it's not well defined, and you'll get
Yeah.
different responses from different, and of course this is contextually dependent too within certain. I mean, there's so many different sects of Christianity, right? They're not all gonna tell you the same thing, but
It
I
is
mean,
So in
poorly
Judaism,
defined
there's
enough. It is possible for a child to live their entire life in blind terror that they have
Yeah.
inadvertently committed the unforgivable sin. So there's
Oh,
always
yeah.
that.
I mean, in Judaism, there's this idea of there are three sins. They're not unforgivable, but they're so bad that you should. It's better to give up your own life than to do it. And those are like murder, idol worship, and like
Yeah.
rape and incest. So like if you're forced by gunpoint to murder someone or to rape someone or to worship an idol, you should let yourself be killed rather than do it.
Well, funny part about that. Okay, never mind. I'll save that for later. There's a whole story about King Jehu, I think, in First Kings somewhere. But either way, so is there a link between that Kip, what you were talking about, and just hamartia, right? Because that also means sin, but it also means like missing the mark or erring in Greek,
Yeah.
right? So that's where we get hamartiology.
Yeah.
So like is like, because this one isn't was this one explicitly interpreted as a sin? I don't think so. But if they
Which one are you talking about?
you're talking about this story and how the word
No,
is
no,
used
no.
in
It
this.
means
No,
that
no,
they
no.
won't
In this
even
story,
miss.
it just
It
means they
doesn't mean
don't
they sin.
like this. The root is used to
Yeah.
like in the context of they don't miss when they shoot, right?
Yeah.
They're not
Mhm.
missing the mark.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Right?
It's
It has
the
nothing.
old
There's no cultic import on the use of the word in this story.
it's one of the
This
things
is the sort of thing. It's the way that pastors will construct entire sermons on the basis of etymologies, right?
Sure. All right.
Where this word stems from this archaic root, therefore I'm going to build an entire theology
absolutely.
on what this means. So yeah,
And it's a
that's
good way when you're doing outreach and trying to convert people to
sure.
minimize how fucked up the concept of sin is and how demented
Well,
and twisted
right,
and
this
evil it
is
is to pretend it's just missing the mark. It's just missing the mark. You shot and you didn't hit it. It's
like
hey.
this is the consequence of that, right? Like if all sins are equal, then not only does that turn a child's disobedience against their parent into the same thing as like a genocide or a mass murder, it also provides the same avenue
Those
for
are
repentance
sins.
and forgiveness, right? It's pretty terrible.
Yeah, it is pretty terrible. And for the one Christian who's desperately trying to convert people by pretending that an unforgivable sin isn't biblical, and where could you ever come up with such a horrible idea? Jesus said unforgivable sin. Jesus said, anything said against the Son of Man will be forgiven, but whosoever speaks against the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven. And therefore, I deny the Holy Spirit. So there, you can't
Fuck that
save
Holy
me.
Spirit.
Fuck off.
Well, I think the theology for that is that you have to be imbued with the Holy Spirit, but if you deny it, then obviously you won't be saved. But the I think Aaron has a shirt with those verses listed on it.
Yep, I do.
I believe it.
I do. I am unforgivable, and then it gives like 3 different references. Matt White says, Aaron, TBF, and for whatever reason, I can't remember
To
what
be fair.
TBF stands for.
To be
Oh.
fair.
To be fair, okay. At the time of the Revolutionary War, France had an airfield.
Well, yeah, air
The
balloons.
Mongolia River.
Adams and Jefferson witnessed the Mongolian balloon liftoff.
Go for you.
That Trump, he's just thinking,
Yeah, but those
3 steps ahead of everyone
Um,
else, right?
I'm almost sure the Mongolia balloon you couldn't really move because they didn't have like most hot air balloons literally have like a furnace inside the balloon basket.
Oh.
The first balloons literally had a fire on the ground, and then they had the balloon like attached with ropes above it, so he couldn't actually move around. So an airfield,
wow.
as in this is the field where you can fly.
Maybe could
I
swing
still have
slightly.
commentary.
Yeah, yeah.
Yay!
I
Unfortunately.
haven't finished my commentary.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. So, verses 36, and also include the off topic because, verses 36 to 41. These verses are generally seen as a flashback, or as Nelson describes it, quote, a sort of cinematic flashback as though using a different camera angle, end quote. He further writes, the flashback section introduces and focuses on the matter of the signal. It also stresses the important role of turning in verses 39 and 41, along with Benjamin looking back in verse 40. Israel can carry out its ruse because it trusts the ambush they had set around Gibeah in verse 36b, a phrase which reuses and reverses the word order of the first action of their campaign in verse 29, set an ambush. The normal course of a battle narrative only picks up again in verse 42. Retreat, pursuit, death totals, comprehensive slaughter, and torching the city. Analyzed in this way, the main story breaks off and then restarts at the point of Benjamin's consciousness of defeat, which is repeated in verse 41b from verse 36a. Now on verse 45, Rock of Rimon, in Hebrew, Sela Harimon, literally rock of the pomegranate. Butler notes that the name is also a title of the god Hadad. Thus, the place could be a worship place where people could flee for asylum. He notes that it has been located at either Ramun, 5.5 miles or 9 kilometers northeast of Gibeah, or at Megariat el Gaye over the Wadi Es Swenat, about 1 mile or 2 kilometers east of Gibeah. He also notes Guillaume's opinion, quote, a local toponym connected to Baal Rimon, 2 Kings 5:18, Lord of Thunder, may have been reinterpreted as the rock of the pomegranate, symbol of fertility, an obvious place to find refuge in order to remarry and produce offspring, end quote. Nelson writes that there may be a, quote, subtle solid connection with the rock of Rimon. A landmark pomegranate tree in this neighborhood is associated with Saul in 1 Samuel 14:2, and one Rimon was father of the assassins of Ishbal in 2 Samuel 4 verses 2, 5, and 9. On that same verse, Gidom, in Hebrew Gidom, with an ayin. Early translations take Gidom to refer to a certain place. Alexandrinus reads Gadam, and Vaticanus Gedan. Peshitta has Givon. However, Fernández-Marcos...
Sounds a lot like goddamn. Sorry.
Gadam.
Wait,
Yeah.
which word is this?
Gidom.
Which verse? 47.
45.
Oh, I see. I went ahead.
However,
I see it. Yeah.
However, Fernández-Marcos prefers changing the MT vocalization to Gidam, APL infinitive of the verb Gimel Dalet Ein, and so translates till they cut them off. Likewise, Butler notes that preliminary and interment report amends the text to read until they had hewed them down, based on, quote, a simplification of the text and scribal misunderstanding of linguistic and historical date, end quote. Nelson, however, retains the MT vocalization of Gidom and writes that this mention could reflect a traditional etiology, perhaps deriving from, quote, clearing an open place, end quote. He writes, quote, its name may have an etiological echo as the place of cutting down in an epic battle, end quote. Likewise, Amit and Niditch preserve the MT.
Wow.
Yeah.
I
And
did actually
finally,
have a
right,
question on verse 31, if you go a bit. It says, they were drawn away onto the roads, one which went to Bethel and one that went to Gibeah. They were,
mhm.
So they
these are the
lured them
roads
to a
outside the
crossroads?
town. No, but these are the two roads leading out of the town of Gibeah. One goes to Bethel and one goes to Gibeah. That doesn't make any sense.
It seems like they lured them to a crossroads to cause confusion as to which way they were going to flee to, or
That would be the
Oh, wait,
parallel.
away from the town onto the roads.
Mm.
Ah, I see. And then one would have gone back to where they came from. But normally,
so remember,
would
they're
be
trying to
one
lure
road
them
with
away
two
so they
ends.
can burn down the city.
Okay, yeah, I guess a crossroad nearby could make sense as well, but whatever.
Okay, my final comment on verse 48. While several commentators take it as a cherem, or banning, event, Nelson writes that it is, quote, an inventory of destruction similar to lists summarizing explicit enforcements of the ban. Deuteronomy 2:34, 3:6, Joshua 6:21, and 1 Samuel 15:3, end quote. He further writes, for the overall narrative, what is particularly important is that this slaughter means that there are remaining neither existing wives nor even any women at all to serve as candidates for marriage. Although the noun met properly indicates males, it can be used by extension for people in general, as seen in Deuteronomy 26:5, 28:62, Psalms 26:4, and Job 22:15. When the reader reaches 21:7, any ambiguity about this is cleared up. That's it.
There is the language here. It also says, and put them to the sword, towns, people, and cattle. And then they set fire to the towns that were left.
Because the God of infinite loving mercy and wisdom and all of that decided that all the innocents needed to be killed too, and the strategy of taking livestock for the reasons that you would use livestock should also be denied because reasons.
This just seems to be indiscriminate violence at the end of the battle. I mean, it's not like, against the Canaanites when God explicitly said, you go in there and you kill every fucking baby and don't you let one person escape, or so help me, except the virgin girls. You can keep them, and then not totally not for rapey purposes, but like
totally not for rapey purposes, but only
Yeah.
keep them if they're virgins.
Virgin girls. Yeah, but not the
then
boys.
you can keep them for yourselves.
Yeah,
It's just
yeah.
hyperbolic, Lilith. It's just hyperbolic. Everyone
But
knows they were just killing the soldiers.
Yeah.
That's it.
No, but
That's
in
it.
this one, they're just killing as soldiers. In other stories where they're fighting the Canaanites,
I'm-
God is
I'm being facetious. I just watched.
Very
remember,
I watched.
remember, Saul lost his crown because he didn't
Yeah.
quite kill everyone in the
no,
town.
I just Dr. Josh shared a new inspiring philosophy video with me yesterday. So
lovely.
I'm a little.
The thing is, we heard that exact thing here on this show with P-Town.
All the
Yeah.
time.
I just watched Kip just rub his eye. You could tell that his head hurt.
I'm sorry.
So here, I don't know. On that note, was I gonna? I'll pull something out quickly here. This is fun. So this is what is this? I can't see it very clearly.
Oh,
Sorry.
someone's trying
It's
to
not working.
defend. God didn't tell them to rape anyone.
He didn't have to.
No, he told them to keep them
No.
for marriage. First of all, in this story, God doesn't say anything. They do it by themselves.
Yes,
But it seems to be that they're
yeah.
basing it, the pattern is based on what God told them to do in Exodus or whatever. And or at least the person who wrote this was like, yeah, we'll just do it the same way. But I was wondering if also this pattern of like, burn the towns without people and cattle, if that's related to the laws of a idolatrous city. maybe that was considered like, oh, this is a rebellious city. It's the same thing.
Oh, like if
Right.
you if they worship a foreign god and you have to stone them all and burn the city to the ground.
Yeah, but the people, like the rest of the people, wouldn't have been seen as like, righteous, Yahweh worshippers at this time. They would have been seen as problematic.
Well, definitely
Right.
not righteous, but it seems that their complicity is because they didn't hand over the people who did this. It was that hand over the men who did this horrible crime, and no, they're part of us, so we're gonna fight to defend the
Right. I mean,
right
it could
to
just be a
right
plot point. It could just be a plot point to
Yeah.
get to the next bit. But the question is, where does the writer get the realism to make it make sense in the context of the story that, oh yeah, they killed everyone. And that comes from, I guess, Exodus and other bits of Joshua. Right.
Before we'll get to the next chapter, I should note Jerome, who writes that the Benjaminites were saved from total destruction through divine providence, so that Paul could call himself Benjaminite.
What about Jesus?
I fucking hate Jerome. Jerome did so much. Like he wrote a lot, but he was so bad at basically everything that he was the entire reason for the whole Nestorian controversy. It was his mistranslation of Nestorius's works that basically had him turned into a heretic. It wasn't even that crazy what he was saying. Like, there was a reevaluation in Alois Grillmeyer's Christ and Christian Tradition of Nestorius's position, and he's basically like, listen, Jerome basically fucked this guy over. Like, he shouldn't have been considered a heretic in the first place.
Yeah, you want to talk about post hoc ergo propter hoc. We didn't kill off all the Benjamites, so that thousands upon thousands of years later, a heretical little narcissist who hates women could go around converting people to a different religion that started as an off branch of Judaism, but will be responsible for horrific crimes against Judaism for centuries. Yay!
It doesn't make any sense. Like, what even is the point of it? Oh, so Paul can call himself a Benjamite, and if he, like, when you say so, Paul would exist. Like, if they killed off the Benjamites, it's not like Paul would have been from a different tribe.
So,
yeah,
I'll just throw this in there. This is from a monument erected to Shalmaneser III, king of Assyria. He marched the journey of 3 days in a night while the sun didn't rise. The fiery glow was amidst them. He slashed the wombs of the pregnant, ripped out babies. Of their strongest he cut the necks. The smoke of the land shut off their troops. The one who sins against Ashur turns into ruin. Let me sing the victory of Ashur mighty, who keeps going to battle and keeps achieving victory over worldwide coalitions. Let the first one hear and tell the later ones. And I often wonder how many Christian apologists are happy to say that, well, Shalmaneser was just fighting against the soldiers. That's clearly what that means.
Yeah, it was word for word scripture, pretty much.
And then Matt White says, at Lilith Liberated, the Russian Orthodoxy had trouble with King Nebuchadnezzar because in Russian, it sounds like no God and no Tsar. Lawrence, can you confirm that?
Lawrence is the one to comment on this.
So Neba is sky.
No, like Nebo.
Nizar. Okay, so Nebo. Okay, I get Nebuk in Nizar. Yeah. So no God and no Tsar. Yeah.
Okay.
And I
that's
mean,
how you would say. But they would say
probably the nicest thing I've ever heard said of Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah.
Okay, so next chapter.
All right, Lilith, you're going to read this one?
Well, it is your channel. If you really want to, you can, but
I'm going to let you read it because you want to.
You're very kind.
Or I guess technically not. It would be not God and not Tsar. So
Well, now we have to get wives for the Benjamites. You know, the men who ran away from the battle and hid while the towns were brutally slaughtered and burned. Yeah. So, the men of Israel had taken an oath at Mizpah. Not one of us will give his daughter in marriage to a Benjamite. The people went to Bethel, where they sat before the Lord until evening, raising their voices and weeping bitterly. "O Lord, the God of Israel," they cried, "why has this happened to Israel? Why should one tribe be missing from Israel today, if it isn't the consequences of my actions?" Early the next day, the people built an altar and presented burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. Then the Israelites asked, "Who from all the tribes of Israel has failed to assemble before the Lord?" For they had taken a solemn oath that anyone who failed to assemble before the Lord at Mizpah should certainly be put to death. Now the Israelites grieved for their brothers, the Benjamites. "Today one tribe is cut off from Israel," they said. "How can we provide wives for those who are left, since we have taken an oath by the Lord not to give them any of our daughters in marriage?" Then they asked, which one of the tribes of Israel failed to assemble before the Lord at Mizpah? And they discovered that no one from Jabesh Gilead had come to the camp for the assembly. For when they counted the people, they found that none of the people of Jabesh Gilead were there. So the assembly sent 12,000 fighting men with instructions to go to Jabesh Gilead and put to the sword those living there, including the women and children. "This is what you are to do," they said. "Kill every male and every woman who is not a virgin." Deja vu.
Yep.
They found among the people living in Jabesh Gilead 400 young women who had never slept with a man, and they took them to the camp at Shiloh in Canaan. Then the whole assembly sent an offer of peace to the Benjamites of the rock of Rimmon, at the rock of Rimmon. So the Benjamites returned at that time and were given the women of Jabesh Gilead who had been spared. Wrong use of that word, but there were not enough for all of them. Yeah. The people grieved.
Implication here, because I mean the Christian apologists, when we're talking about Numbers 31, the Christian apologists will come up with all kinds of excuses about how that doesn't imply what it clearly implies. And when we
they
get
can't do that here.
And when they do this repetition in this version, it seems to more strongly imply. This is clarified, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but they could argue that it's not divinely sanctioned.
Yeah.
Well,
they could
yeah,
argue
it's not
that.
explicitly dictated by
Yeah.
God, but it's pretty clear the practice is what it is. From the point of view of the women, I don't think they thought they had been spared. Now the people grieve. Sorry.
Someone said something about, "Oh, why aren't they reading the King James Bible?" Or,
or basically an English translation of Kimchi's commentary.
Yeah, that's because it's a shit translation.
It
It's
is.
lovely poetry and good history. But if you have belonged to a church, God's servant, who tells you that the King James Version is the original and authorized version, what they're actually doing is counting on you to be not as familiar with archaic English as you would be with modern English, like any person living in the modern day. So they can fuck with your head about anything they need to. And just basically it's a diet version of keeping the Latin text so that the proletariat, the poor little peons, can't be bothered to read the Bible and will feed it to you.
I mean, the biggest issue with the KJV is that so all the manuscripts the manuscripts that are used for the text that were used for its translation, like so the Textus Receptus, right, and the authorized version, the texts that were used for those were I think none of them were older than the 9th century. I think even the 10th century. Like they're all very late texts. And since then, we have discovered so many manuscripts, and we have actually developed like
So many.
good text critical methods that the KJV just kind of sucks at this point. Like it is not a version.
It was the best they
you should
could
be
do
using.
at the time.
At the time with what they had, yes.
With
But
what they had, no hate to them. But yeah.
yeah, no,
Yeah, it was better
don't
than
use the KJV.
the
Use
previous one.
something better.
One of the weird things about the KJV, which is because its usage of like early modern English with the thou and the the singular you is thou and all of those verbs that go along with it. The weird thing is that they use thou for God to stress that it's singular. But the weird thing is that you wouldn't have used thou to refer to a god or a king or anything. You would always use a plural to show respect.
Dan McClellan just hopped in the chat
Wow.
to address the KJV allegations.
So he knows
Yes,
me.
Dan.
He's like a genie, right? He just
Thank you,
Okay,
Dan.
so all we have to
King
say
James
is King
version.
James
and he pops up. Good to see you, Dan.
There's no discussion about the KJV. Scholars have already known its issues for a very long time. This is not a debate. It's just not up for debate.
There is no
It
debate.
just
God's
sucks.
servant, you need to educate yourself from actual scholarly sources before you say anything. So it's fine. You are who you are. You believe what you believe. Go learn some things and come back.
He said he'll look into
It is funny how many, like especially Southern evangelicals, swear by the King James version, and I don't know where their justification is.
Well,
I
the
think
thing
it's
is
just like a
because it's like
universal thing.
it's such a beautiful translation, right? And it also has a long history, right? So
Yeah.
they want to kind of keep the tradition of its
Consensus
usage.
values.
But when it comes to what should be used, there are a good amount of possible translations you can do. There's no such thing as a perfect translation. That's something that you have to keep in mind, no matter what translation you're reading from. But so I always recommend that all translations need notes and need some commentary, at least a little bit. I'm using the SBL Study Bible, which is what the NRSVU, and that one's pretty good from what I've seen. But I'm sure people have other recommendations as well.
Can you give a full list of all the versions that are better than the KJV?
All right, let's see.
All of
You
them.
got about 90%.
Oh, not the word. And
Pull,
the
Peter,
Jehovah's
maybe
Witness
pull up
one.
the off-topic thing because
Yeah, fair
we're
enough.
off topic.
Okay.
Thank you, Peter.
All right, just to clear this, the value of the King James version is that you don't understand it, and some people want to read the Bible without understanding it. That's the point.
So one of my teachers in grad school told me this story that when he was at like a church teaching people about the Dead Sea Scrolls, a very interested man came up to him afterwards, and he's like, "Do you have like pictures or stuff of these amazing manuscripts you've been telling us about tonight?" And he had a couple in his briefcase, so he pulled them out and showed them to him. The guy was looking at them, and then he responded to me. He says, "So can you tell me, are all the these and the thous still in the text here in these Dead Sea Scrolls manuscripts?" So
Dan McClellan recommends the New Revised Standard Version Updated Edition.
yeah.
Excellent choice. Thank you, Dan.
Which strangely
That's
is
kind
not
of
available on the website that I'm at. It gives me the
I'm personally
I
using
used the New Revised Standard Version, the anglicized. It doesn't have the updated.
Are you on Bible Gateway?
Yes.
Oh, it should have it. I've used the
I think
NRSVU.
I've seen it there, yeah.
Yeah, it should have
I'm personally using the JPS version.
Oh, you're right. It is
1985.
down here. Got it.
There's some
Well,
issues
where-
with JPS too, but we won't get into that.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's fairly accurate in my opinion.
Yeah, I like it quite a bit actually.
Please continue, Lilith.
Thank you. Okay, so going back to verse 15. The people grieved for Benjamin because the Lord had made a gap in the tribes of Israel, and the elders of the assembly said, with the women of Benjamin destroyed, how shall we provide wives for the men who are left? The Benjamite survivors must have heirs, they said, so that a tribe of Israel will not be wiped out. We can't give them our daughters as wives, since we Israelites have taken an oath. Cursed be anyone who gives a wife to a Benjamite. But look, there is the annual festival of the Lord in Shiloh, to the north of Bethel, and east of the road that goes from Bethel to Shechem, and to the south of Libnah. So they instructed the Benjamites, saying, go and hide in the vineyards and watch. When the girls of Shiloh come out to join in the dancing, then rush from the vineyards, and each of you seize a wife from the girls of Shiloh and go to the land of Benjamin. When their fathers or brothers complain to us, we will say, do us a kindness by helping them, because we did not get wives for them during the war, and you are innocent since you did not give your daughters to them. So that is what the Benjamites did. While the girls were dancing, each man caught one and carried her off to be his wife. Then they returned to their inheritance and rebuilt the towns and settled in them. At that time, the Israelites left that place and went home to their tribes and clans, each to his own inheritance, except the Jabesh Gileadites, because they were all slaughtered, so that someone else could have an inheritance. And in those days, Israel had no king, and everyone did as he saw fit.
So women are wildlife needing to be caught.
Well, you know, if you just kidnap a woman who went to a festival with her friends and take her home and rape her, you get a wife.
Yeah.
And, you know, her father should be okay with it because he didn't have to break a vow. So, you know, whatever.
Yeah. So he's innocent. You kidnapped somebody, but he's innocent. And you're fully justified. God wanted you to abduct this child.
Like,
It's
And I'm going back to
That's
Numbers
right,
31
and
again,
it's-
because Numbers 31 says it specified that they were talking about the women children, the women, the infant women, or the women among the little ones.
I think this version seems to imply single women as opposed to, but the fact that they only could find 400 means that they went as young as they could, I guess.
Yeah. I'll accept that these
They don't-
appear to be older because they're taking part in dancing.
Yeah, so there is actually a tradition that I didn't even know that it was connected to this story until I read it, which is that there is this idea that I think it's Yud Shvat, which is the 10th day of Shvat, which is it's considered like the Jewish Valentine's Day.
No, it's Tu B'Av. Tu
B'Av. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Tu B'Av, which is the 15th of Av.
Yeah.
And one of the I think this must be a source for it, which is like the day of the festival of the Lord, the girls would go out to dance in the vineyards. And this was so the story that I heard was like, oh yeah, it used to be a tradition that on this date, all the single girls would go out into the vineyards and wait for a single man to come and woo them off. But I don't know. This story doesn't seem to line up completely with that story.
I do not have a distinct impression of wooing. There does not appear to be
It
any
is a-
wooking happening.
Yeah,
it
it's
appears
like,
to be
it's like the man comes out with a club.
I hit woman on head, woman mine.
It is a. It
I don't
is
know.
A pretty
Yeah.
This is
clear
a romantic.
reflection of-
Honk.
This is a romantic illustration of dating rituals, in the sense that, like, Vikings carrying off English women.
See, I don't know about you guys, but this is pretty hot to me. This is very, very steamy.
It's not. Let's just say it's not that much different from the regular marriage contracts that were happening at the time. The only difference is that the fathers didn't get any money.
This is very much in keeping with a lot of what we read in, in terms of biblical family values. And I would say, as I read through this, it looks to my mind here that the priority in this story appears to be the importance of keeping a vow, right? Coupled with, and its intention with the importance of ensuring heritage and posterity,
Progeny, yeah.
Inheritance.
which are like priorities. Like these are primary concerns throughout a lot of the biblical narrative.
So, Dr. Kill,
Mhm.
in Numbers 31, it specifies that the girls were among the little ones. It specifies that these were the children. So, the only way I could interpret that is that this is before bat mitzvah. So they're preteens. They're like,
Well, there is
12
no
at the
bat
oldest.
mitzvah at this point. Like this is so.
Yeah,
Well, I
bat mitzvah
realize
is
this,
very
but
recent,
but
yeah,
the
yeah.
But like
division the
age of
division between the
maturity.
children and the adults in the Jewish
Yeah.
tradition was, for girls it was 12, right? So I'm accepting that because these are dancers, probably older.
Yeah.
But how old would you say?
Well, here's the thing. We actually had a bit of a chat on this on the Discord server. Was that yesterday? One of the challenges in reading the texts is that because we have this conception of childhood in the abstract, right? Within antiquity and in a lot of this ancient literature, they understand it differently, and scholars are still kind of grappling with what childhood even looked like in the ancient world. So I'm convinced by a number of sociologists and anthropologists who have argued that in the ancient Near East, and this is reflected in the Hebrew Bible, children were basically just seen as like miniature adults. And this is reflected in a lot of the language and some of the conceptualization of children in the text. Like, for example, the word that's very commonly translated as little boy or little girl, na'ar or na'ara, this is also applied in clear instances where it does refer to adults, right? But seems to be more of a description of a social distinction, which may mean something like an unattached or an uncoupled uh, person who basically hasn't had sex yet, or a person. It's oftentimes used of slaves. So there's this social element. All that to say, these are, when it is used, it's probably used of like people, no matter who they are, most often being quite young, based on the ways in which it describes them. So it's hard to put ages on some of this stuff when you go this far back, because
But
like
in
if you're
general, we're not talking about over 18.
well, I would say you're not talking about, like, it's hard, you're not talking about adults, right?
Yeah.
And so most of the time it's making a distinction between whoever is part of this social grouping versus this other social grouping. And very often, as I read it, it's the distinction between those who are still part of their father's households, which would mean that they haven't been betrothed and married, essentially, and coupled up
I
with,
mean, but when you talk about
with a woman
ancient
or
things, I mean, even it's not, you don't even have to go that ancient. I mean, my grandparents were both married at like 16 and 15. and that was
Yeah,
just
I think that was
at
pretty
their
normal
time. That was
for
the
a long
standard
time.
practice. By the time
Sure.
you're 16, you're married.
Yeah, I think I do think it's kind of silly, you know, for people to insist that, you know, it couldn't possibly indicate like small children or just because there's not really any support. The text is so vague on this idea of where this cutoff is, right, between child and adult, or you know, and they're not, as you know, they're not conceptualizing these things in terms of age. It's
Well,
and
also, I want to
yeah,
point out that with terms of a marriage, like you could have a marriage contract written up for a very small child. And they're
it's possible,
intended
right?
then to, the idea being not that you would take them home as your wife at 4, but that once they had reached whatever age is deemed appropriate in that culture, then they would go home and be your wife. But you're already sort of married, like the contract is written up. So
Yeah.
you could hypothetically have, like, at least in the first instance where they went and slaughtered the towns and took all the little girls, you could totally take the little girls and be like, okay, you get this one when she's older.
Yeah. Actually,
Okay.
in Judaism,
Yeah,
they
yeah,
have
being very boring.
There are 2 steps to the marriage
No,
process.
you're not.
Oh,
Like nowadays, we have engagement and marriage. Engagement isn't like a legal definition or anything,
mhm.
but it used to be betrothal and marriage were these 2 legal definitions that you would actually enter into. And if you were betrothed, you belong, you know, it would be adultery to have sex with someone else. And nowadays, betrothal and marriage is like the same thing. It happens in the same day or whatever. And engagement is just a secular concept of announcing it in advance.
Mhm.
Really.
Yeah, I would say that it's, you know, it's vague because of they already had their assumptions for the people reading this in the ancient context. They wouldn't have
Yeah.
really needed, you know, that further explanation. Like, and it differs from culture to culture, where, you know, what is the rite of passage into adulthood. Like,
Yeah,
sometimes they do it younger, sometimes they do it older. Sometimes you'd have some ritual, sometimes you'd have a contest, right? Like that was one of the ways to go into the next stage of life in ancient Greece, for women, was to be part of. It was kind of like the Olympics, but for women. So there's something like that. They had these Panhellenic games for it. So and it differed from place to place, from time to time.
Yeah, and there's also there's moral relativism even within a culture, because I mean, for whatever reason, people were totally tolerant of Elvis traveling with an entourage of 14-year-olds.
Right? Yeah,
I
wild.
did not know that.
Yikes.
Yeah.
The
Comments?
things you didn't want to know.
Yeah. Okay. So let me jump to
this-
these comments then. I've got Juju Dude offers £10 and said, "So which version is inherent?" I think they meant inerrant.
Inerrant?
Yeah, inerrant was probably what they meant. Yeah.
The version in your brain.
The original
original Hebrew.
manuscripts.
Yeah, the original
It
manuscripts.
says it right in
At
the
least the ones
Chicago
that we
Statement.
have, at least.
You know, all those original manuscripts that we don't have.
Yeah, it's
When
one of
I
those. They're
told
definitely.
my pastor that I had lost my faith, he literally said that. He said, "We only have to believe that the manuscripts are inerrant in their original forms. We don't have the
Sure.
original forms." And I'm
It's
like,
very convenient, isn't it?
Jesus fucking Christ. So we are obligated to believe X. X is objectively bullshit. Therefore, we will believe X1.
But Q,
You don't get to
But
truth
Q-
that way.
but Q isn't errant.
Right. Well,
Q,
Q,
yeah, Q is
obviously.
inherent. Yeah. As far as we know, Q is inherent.
Why
And then
not?
comment from Dion Yisian. I have no idea how to say that. $20. Thank you. Says, "For drinks, Dr. Kip, I will talk to you later."
I have no idea what that
He's
means.
referring to he is in the Discord. He is a mythicist, and basically, yeah, and so he wants to talk with
okay.
you
Wow.
and Lawrence.
Cool.
And
This is
Well,
Yeah.
that's
this
fun.
is
Well,
the
good.
second time.
Wait,
This is the second time I made a stupid joke, and then there was a relevant comment right afterwards.
Oh, no.
And then Trevor and Wright says, what are some of the similarities and differences when comparing the Dead Sea Scroll and the modern Bible from the Septuagint perspective to the Masoretic one?
Oh, Trevor with the big questions.
yep, classic
Oh, but
Trevor.
So
This is-
much.
this
I
is a-
mean,
This
That's
is
a good
fun
question for the
though.
reading, the
You
Hebrew reading.
Teach an
show.
entire
What's it called?
course on answering that question. We could devote
what's
6
we,
hours.
there
to
are
teach-
volumes dedicated to comparing the the different manuscripts. BHQ, basically this textual criticism. No.
I was
Can
I was
we-
saying, maybe Dr. Kip, you want to promote a show that you're doing that might answer
Oh,
that
I
question?
we do a bi-weekly Hebrew reading show on my channel with Dr. Josh where we read Hebrew text. But the question is, this is a fun question because one of the things that the Dead Sea Scrolls has helped to show us is just the dynamic sense of the text at in the first century BCE. We have Hebrew copies of something that looks close to the Masoretic text, which became like the medieval text of the rabbis. We have Hebrew copies of what looks like the base text of the Septuagint. Clearly these were translated from the original Greek into the Hebrew.
Oh,
I'm just kidding, guys. And
Oh.
then we also have copies of texts that look really close to the Samaritan Pentateuch, which is another competing version of the biblical text. And the point here is that there appears to be like competition between various Jewish groups. They all kind of had like their favorite versions of the Hebrew Bible text. They had their favorite books, and the collections differed from one another. And all of this stuff kind of you can track back as far as like the 3rd century. So what looks to a number of, I think a number of scholars, I would include myself in this, is that right around the 3rd century, you've got this growing movement to start collating and collecting this literature, and it produces basically this competition among a variety of different Jewish sects. The
Sir.
Samaritans were doing their own thing. The so-called Alexandrian Jews were doing their own thing. The Palestinian Jews were doing their own thing.
And
Dr. Kip,
I don't know about you, but I've always been a Mount Gerizim guy kind of myself.
Yeah, I'm
Dr. Kip, are you telling us, just to be clear, are you telling us that the canonization of Scripture was essentially a meme war?
Well, the thing is, it was a popularity
yeah.
contest.
Yeah.
It wasn't like a lot of people think of it as like this big vote. No.
Yeah, it was a meme war. It's
was a
the memes
popularity
that
contest, yeah.
stick.
Basically,
And I
yeah.
think it's reactionary too, right?
Yeah.
Like I actually tend to think just the idea of putting like these 5 books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, maybe this is something that the Samaritans did first, and that everybody else was responding to that. So yeah, and one of the reasons, one of my reasons for thinking that is because the Samaritan tradition that we have inherited in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the only evidence that we have of like a complete collection of 5 books of the Torah from that early, all occur within the Samaritan tradition.
And then we have a
Wow.
comment from Dionysian, offers $2, thank you, and says, does this sound like the rape of the Sabines?
Yeah, I mean, Niditch refers to it actually in her commentary.
This is Greek mythology.
Yeah, no, it's actually Latin.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's
And then,
it's not a story.
That's what you wanted to say.
then the next
Unfortunately,
comment is from the Unlucky Legume, offers $50. Thank you so much. It says, interesting that after the girls are kidnapped / turned into sex slaves, they put their father's minds at rest by assuring them that technically they didn't break their vows, as if that would be the primary reason that they would have to be upset.
yeah, this
Wait,
was
did-
not written by a girl
vows
dad.
and inheritance.
It does say like, you know, be nice to them, kind of like
Do
let
us
them
a
take his
favor.
wives. Yeah, do them a favor, like let them take them as wives without payment.
I'm
Because
just
that
wondering,
way
I mean,
we can do it.
with the exception of Jephthah, it really seems like most of the people in the Bible treat their daughters as if they are cattle. They're daughters. They're very daughters. That you know they'll be proud of their sons, but their daughters are just breed mares.
Well, Jephthah also did the same thing. He just, you know, at least tended sort of appeared to feel bad about it. But yeah, that's generally women have been bitching about the fact that we need to like pull teeth for men to think of us as human beings forever. Men just don't notice because they don't listen to us because we're not people.
Yeah. And then we get a comment from that guy who says, I have a question that's off topic. My interpretation of the Abraham / Isaac story is that God is telling the Hebrews they can stop sacrificing their kids now. What do you guys think?
I feel like you would have just said it.
Isn't that a bit? I think it's also a bit late, right?
Yeah,
Well,
it's
it
quite
is
late.
later, yeah.
That's a theological interpretation a lot of people have come up with to try and fix an obvious.
Yeah, it could just be a later polemic against it, but not necessarily like, oh, now we should change. It's probably more like, oh, here are some people that we don't like that are still doing it. Let's add some extra polemics against them.
Yeah, and even then, like it's not. I know that Dan uses this word a lot. You can't really be univocal about the text, right? Because while you have this one perspective that could be like against child sacrifice, you still have plenty of other texts that are not against child sacrifice.
Basically, it's an excuse, and it's you know, the more enlightened will contort to take that kind of method, but it's a lot easier if you just don't obligate yourself to think the text is virtuous.
Yeah, honestly, like a lot of issues kind of go away once you once you start to realize like that like, and this is something that I talk with some of my Christian friends a lot with about, is that like if I bring up like a problem or a contradiction, I'm like I always say, hey, this contradiction isn't like an issue if you take like a critical approach to it. Like that issue goes away because you're not, you know, thinking of this as like God's infallible word. Like the issue, it doesn't really become a problem anymore.
It's true. It's true. It's theology puts the holy book in an untenable position by making it a holy book. If it's just a fucking book, then we could just be honest about it.
Yep. And I see a comment, preach, sister, from Sterling Nash.
Yeah. So I'll start my commentary.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll start on verse 1. Niditch comments, for the first time in the story cycle, the reader learns about an oath bearing the exchange of women with Benjamin. In a traditional culture, the transfer of women creates peace through political and economic interdependence.
Is that how they call it? This is transfer. Our abduction of your daughters is a transference of peace. I guess in one sense it definitely is.
Like within this ancient economy, this fits, right?
Yes.
Like it's all very transactional.
Yes. So I'll continue. To deny such prized commodities is to break ties and prevent positive interaction. The Israelites are pictured as regretting having taken this step against Benjamin, their kin, and seek a means of restoring the wholeness of the group, the descendants of Israel. This theme of reconciliation is also found in Chronicles, in which writers long for the reunification of the northern and southern kingdoms so long divided. Reconciliation between kin is thus an important late biblical theme, but it appears also in earlier or less datable biblical material. The inevitable rivalry between brothers in Israel regularly ends in reconciliation, as in the tales of Esau and Jacob, Genesis 33 verses 1 through 4, and of Joseph and his brothers, Genesis 45 verses 1 through 9. In Judges 21, the process of reconciliation begins. Perhaps the divisive vow is not mentioned until chapter 21 for dramatic effect, in order to underscore the passage from war to peace, from enmity to reconciliation. Alternatively, the vow alludes to a piece of the story assumed by traditional receivers of the narrative familiar with the full range of motifs that constitute the tradition. On verses 2 to 4, Nelson notes that these verses parallel Israel's actions at Bethel in 2026, as well as those of 2 verses 1 and 5 at Bochim. He writes that the repetition of the two Bethel lament scenes, quote, instructs the reader to compare the two crises, end quote. Butler notes Wong's observation regarding the irony of success being, quote, what eventually also resulted in their weeping before Yahweh. While one records Israel's failure to do what was right, the other records Israel's success in doing what was wrong.
You succeeded in doing what's wrong.
Yeah.
This is relevant to the question I see to the chat now. Donut Loves Coffee says, can Christianity be reformed by any means necessary to become a good religion? Well, I mean, that depends on what your definition of good religion is.
Right, yeah. The way that religion is used is obviously it can go good or it can go poorly, or go well or go poorly. But I think that if there are, God, it's a big question, right? When it comes to reforming it, right? There is potentially a future in which like enough theologians and enough pastors decide to just be good, kind of to align with everyone else's definition of good more generally. So that's a possibility, right? And because of the way that the Bible is, you can find supporting texts for basically anything. So there is totally a way that can happen. Now, unfortunately, or not unfortunately, fortunately, that would mean you'd have to kind of push out the extremist views, which would be great, but we are not there yet.
Honestly, I have a bit of a different perspective, although I do think it's something to have dialogue about. And there's a book, Why Christianity Must Change or Die, which was written by actually a man who deeply loved Christianity, but that's neither here nor there. I think the cancer is always going to be there. I think at root, it is still always going to be about blood magic and human sacrifice, because that is the core of the religion, whatever else you do. And that as long as these texts are held sacred, some motherfucker is going to read them and take them seriously, and then we're all fucked all over again. So can a specific branch of Christianity have enough of the poison trimmed out that it becomes more or less benign? Sure, that happens lots of times, but I think the root is still poison.
Yeah, the whole original sin, damnation, and the blood magic you can't really take it out of Christianity. And
So
it's
much
like the worst
blood
parts.
This is one of the reasons that I see that Islam is growing faster than Christianity. Christianity has a bit too much baggage. There is this idea that you not only believe that there's a God, but that you have to believe somehow that Jesus is the conduit to get to God, regardless what the first commandment says. We're just going to ignore that and take Jesus as the God before God because Jesus is God, which is another bit of baggage that doesn't make any sense. And you have to believe somehow in Jesus as a prophet of God, which was supposed to be unnecessary, and also the way to God, which was supposed to be forbidden, and that he died for your sins that still exist and for which you can still be punished. So what did he die for? There's a handful of issues with Christianity, whereas with Islam, there is one God, and Muhammad is his prophet. That's it. That's all. Oh, by the way, be good to your fellow man, because God wants you to be good to your fellow. So that's super, super simple, right? Nobody reads the Bible. Nobody reads the Quran. Or when you read either one, you read them as poetry, right? So the real meanings of what there's a lot of people that have realized that the Quran doesn't make any sense when they translate it into a different language. When they read it in the original classic Arabic, they don't recognize what it means. Interestingly, so for most people, most believers, they don't read their holy books. They just know the central message. Christianity's got too much baggage in that central message. Islam is a whole lot lighter and thus easier to just accept.
I think the problem is that people wanted to understand it. It's easy to believe if you don't have to understand.
Yeah.
I think that there's at least for like the issues that you bring up with Christian theology, that's kind of why I love studying it so much, is because you kind of see all the different ways that the philosophies of the time intersected, and you got Christianity out of it. Like you got atonement theology, you got like this idea of original sin, and that the thing is that all stems from the settings that the people were living in, and it's really interesting seeing it, because like for me at least, I kind of view Paul's theology, or his Christology is based on Greek Stoicism. So like that's where I think the philosophical framework came from. And I think that it makes slightly more sense in that context once you kind of get the ideas of Stoicism into your head and then read Paul's stuff. It makes a lot more sense. And then you have, some groups going in, a more Gnostic direction, and they take it to the extreme, and it's really interesting, but it is kind of a head scratcher sometimes. But there's a lot of really interesting dynamics at play when it came to the origins of Christianity, and kind of how all those theological schools kind of shit out this new religion in the first century.
Sorry.
We forget how Greek Christianity is. It's very Greek. It's Greek cosplaying as Judaism.
I'll continue. On verse 3, why has this happened to Israel? Butler notes the irony in Israel's interrogative lament. Quote, they made the decision to fight Benjamin. They carried out holy war on Benjamin without specific divine instructions. Then they dare ask God, why has this happened in Israel? End quote. Citing Bloch, he writes, quote, their query seems to represent an attempt to evade the requirements of covenant justice and to find a scapegoat, end quote. Nelson writes that ancient readers would have understood verse 3 as a standard lament language, as in Psalms 10:1, 88:15, which is 40 in the Old Testament, and accept a more general assumption that Yahweh is the causative factor behind all events, especially those of sacred war. On verse 4, the people built an altar. The building of the new altar is surprising, given that in 2026, the Israelites already sacrificed in Bethel. Abravanel writes that they have wished to make peace with God following their disaster in 2034. Nelson proposed that this special altar is a signal that these are especially serious sacrifices. He writes, quote, it may be that temporary or ad hoc altars were sometimes erected for special occasions, like Elijah's rebuilt altar on Mount Carmel in 1 Kings 18:32 and Solomon's overflow altar in 1 Kings 8:64. On verse 5, Niditch writes that the ritual action of verses 3 to 4, quote, seems to inspire a witch hunt for those who did not heed the call to participate in the fighting against Benjamin, end quote. She further writes, the act of reconciliation requires scapegoating. The scapegoating of one group allows the rehabilitation of the real source of tension, the Benjaminites who refused to give up miscreants in their midst. Within the large Transjordanian holding of Manasseh as a group, the inhabitants of Yabesh Gilead, who are sacrificed to achieve unification of the larger people, Israel. End quote. And Nelson writes, slaughter of all males and almost all females can be twisted into a way of securing wives. The discovery that the target is to be Yabesh Gilead further alerts the ancient audience to such a possibility. They know about the traditionally friendly relations between that town and Benjamin through Saul, whose hometown was Gibeah. 1 Samuel 10:27 through 11:15 and 31 verses 11 through 13.
There's a because I've been obsessed with infinitive absolutes for the last week. There's an infinitive absolute in verse 5. He shall be put to Mot Yumat. So this is the a fairly typical way within biblical Hebrew, certainly the earlier texts, to indicate emphases. He shall surely be put to death, and it's very interesting. It's really amusing to see what's going on with the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible when it comes to this expression, because it seems like it was fairly early and it was passing out of usage in the Second Temple period. It doesn't appear very often in Qumran, and I believe by the rabbinic period it's gone altogether. Someone correct me on that if that's wrong, but I believe that's what's taking place. This particular syntactical expression, it seems that the Greek translators of the Hebrew Bible struggled to even know what to do with it. They handled it in various ways, but what most of them did was just treat the one word like a noun and the other one like a verb. So like in this text, the Septuagint translator just basically says, he shall kill him to death, which sounds just as elegant in Greek as it does in English, and it's a result of just failing altogether to understand how the Hebrew text even works.
I know
Yeah, I
that
mean,
because in Greek at least, like a way to understand that would be like, I'll kill him so that he may die, or something like that. Like that's a way to understand that. But still, that's not much better.
If you want to read it literally, it says "death he shall die."
Dying. Yeah.
Death he
And the
shall
way
die.
Motorhead put that was killed by death.
That at least sounds metal. I'm just hearing
It does.
silence. I kill you.
God's servant asks the question of Lilith Liberated. What denomination were you part of, friend?
Ugh.
Yeah, because I hate when the Christians pretend I love you. No, you don't.
Well, I don't know. The thing is, I don't know where this
Yeah.
guy's from. I know a lot of cultures kind of do that.
Okay.
That thing.
He's
So like, to be
it's
fair.
fine. Well, if you're looking to hopefully poke some holes in my theological background and find out where I got these bad ideas that just because I don't understand, yeah, you're gonna have to pull back on that one. Yes, I was raised evangelical with lots of your Bible Belt nonsense and your focus on the family rubbish. However, I read voraciously from childhood. I've read Calvin, I've read Augustine. I worked at a Presbyterian church, moonlighted at an Anglican, was schooled through a Baptist college. I've had a mentor who was a Catholic. I've studied this 6 ways from Sunday from multiple possible perspectives, and ultimately, it's bullshit.
When you say that you've read Calvin, were you ever
John Calvin, not Calvin and
were
Hobbes.
you
I've read
ever
Calvin and Hobbes.
Did you ever consider yourself Calvinist?
God, no, absolutely not. I some of the reading I've done since, but basically I wanted to understand. John Calvin is, oh God, one of his sort of his next in line was John Knox, and reading an exchange between them has been described as reading a dialogue between death and pestilence. No matter how hard I pushed myself to believe what I was told I was obligated to believe, I could not and would not put myself in the belief position that God deliberately created people so that he could torture them for shits and giggles, and that is just. That is ultimately what predestination turns into if you pay attention to it at all, and I just can't.
Gotcha. Then the next comment is, what is that? Tozian says, can you recommend books on the Greek origins of Christianity?
So you got to remember, that's not just the Greek origins. It would be like you have to look at the fact that it was Hellenized Judaism. So it still maintains Jewish roots, very obviously, but it was looked at through a Hellenistic lens. So while man, if there's a book specifically that you're looking for, maybe Scripting Jesus from L. Michael White is a good starting point. He's a very good writer. There is it's an anthology work. It's called The Historical Jesus in Context by Amy Jill Levine and others. That's another possibility. There's a lot of good stuff in there. I would say that you make sure you don't look at it through that one lens, though, because you can also find there's one from the Library of Library of Early Christology or something like that, where it's called the Jewish Roots of Christological Monotheism. So like there are you have to look at it through both those lenses to actually get the full scope of it. Like, it's not just like a one-to-one, like, oh, it was Christianity was a Greek religion. Like it's not that simple.
And then SJL asks, as long as any religious text can be used as an excuse to treat people badly, that religion is irredeemable.
Okay. And that's every religious text. The redemption of religion is honestly in its people. On the internet, internet Christians are often really shitty. Not all of them, but by God, a lot of them. But in my personal life, I have known many excellent, wonderful people who were Christians.
Yeah.
God, frankly, did not deserve them, since everything was, oh, I'm doing this, in the name of God. No, you're a good person and you're doing good, and God does not deserve to take credit for it. God, they deserve better.
I want to add to that too. I've met some really admirable people, really nice, decent, wonderful people who they gravitate toward Christianity because they are good people, and they've been taught that good equals God, right? They don't know anything about history or science or theology or anything, but they're decent people, and so they think of themselves as Christian, which means that they buy into all this other crap on top of it.
But unintentionally. And religion, for the longest time in human history, has, for the vast majority of people, been a background cultural norm, not necessarily something that they had deep philosophical discussions about it. The joke, I've heard both a Jewish and a Christian version of it, that there are two people in town who take religion seriously, the priest and the atheist, the town priest and the town atheist. There is always the town atheist who actually takes it seriously, and the rabbi or priest or pastor. So it's lots of people don't pay attention to the details, and it's unfortunate that the consequences culturally are what they are.
Then Meryl Vandenherk said, for the panel, reminds me of a time in a park show in
of a line.
What's that?
It's a line.
Oh, it reminds me of a line in a park show from Parc Asterisk near Paris. Oh hell! What is this French?
There's a translation. Don't worry.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Si tu meurs, je
If
te
you
tue.
die, I'll kill you. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I love Asterix, by the way. My childhood comic.
And then Donut Loves Coffee adds, if you had full control over humanity, would you remove religious thought from people?
I wouldn't want to have full control over humanity, but if I did, I wouldn't do anything with it because, like, I don't know, man. Like, because then you're controlling people, and then it's like,
Yeah. And then there's the whole
Unintended
issue of
consequences.
religious thought. Isn't that an oxymoron?
No, but it's complicated. It's interwoven with many other forms of thought in our mind. You know, if we could fix some of the misfires that lead us to double down on bad bets, that would be great. But you know, it's not as simple.
And then Mark Agamotto 1313 Smith, what an interesting name, offers $5 and says, didn't a founding father turn to the holy book or turn the holy book into a holy book? Yes, that was Thomas Jefferson, who cut out all the miracles because he didn't believe in any of the superstitious stuff
And the evil stuff, like this story would have been cut out.
Yeah.
Okay, my comment.
He cut out.
Sorry.
Sorry, I didn't realize that he cut out the stuff he thought was bad too. Wow.
I thought so. I should check my Jefferson Bible. I actually have one now, so I should check it.
Yeah, I have
Oh.
never read the Jefferson Bible, but so I don't actually know. I just heard commentary about it. What I read about it was that he cut out all the miracles, all basically the magic.
I'll continue.
Would you, Tomer? We quit holding the
Yes.
show up?
You, on verse 6, the Israelites grieved for the tribe of Benjamin. The word for grieved is vayenachamu, from the root nun chet mem, which is usually rendered as comforted by the Septuagint, which is sometimes rendered as comforted by the Septuagint, repented by the Peshitta and Vulgate, or had pity on them, according to the Targum. Rashi renders vayenachamu as they regretted and writes, they reversed themselves and contemplated escape for them. Halot gives another possibility, console themselves over. And Butler comments, one's interpretation of the term here depends totally on one's interpretation of the context. It does appear that this is a time of mourning that gives way to action. The Israelites find consolation through their lamentation and turn to finding a solution for their problem, stating once again, today one tribe is cut off from Israel. With only 600 Benjaminite men remaining, desperate action is required. The obvious action is to allocate daughters from the other Israelite tribes. On verse 10, including the women and children, Butler writes that implicitly there is an intent to capture all virgins as wives for the Benjaminite. Citing Wong, he writes that while this may be legally justifiable, according to Numbers 31, verses 17 to 18, it is, quote, morally dubious to say the least, end quote. And he notes Bloch's opinion, quote, from a human perspective, this is a clever strategy, exploiting one oath to circumvent another by the selective application of the law of cherem, end quote. And Niditch comments, the ban-like action is really invoked in order to free up virgin girls for Benjamin. As in Numbers 31, a special category of banning obtains involving virgin girls. The central characteristic of the war ideology of the ban is the destruction of all human beings, regardless of gender, age, or military status. The killing is a totalistic devotion to sacrifice equated with a holy burnt offering to God in Deuteronomy 13:16. In Judges 20 verses 10 through 12, as in Numbers 31 verses 7 to 18, banning allows for the sparing of pure women as booty, unsullied and unmarked by men's sexual branding. They are blank slates available to be possessed and defined by marriage with the men of Benjamin. Ironically, the women stolen under the cover of these convenient charges, themselves sacrificial offerings of another kind, are insufficient to provide women for Benjamin and seal reconciliation. Further sacrifice is needed, end quote. And also, I should note that the Alexandrinus reads the women and the people, and the Vaticanus lacks this phrase.
I got another comment
and the
from
people?
Merrill Vandenherk, who says, according to Andrew Seidel, Jefferson cut out the natural parts because it was quicker than cutting out the supernatural parts, and said it was like pulling diamonds out of a dunghill. Okay.
And
Fair point.
for a question, Isaac, it's Women and People by Alexandrinus, not children.
Ah, I see. They changed it from women. Oh, well, yes, women and people, obviously.
Yes.
And
That
what
makes
verse is that?
10.
Oh, okay.
And Vaticanus doesn't have the women and children.
So that's the only version that has that weird translation, yeah? Probably
I
just an error.
think so. Let me
Yeah.
check real quick. Yeah. These are the only ones. Okay, so on verse 11, every woman who is not a virgin. How could the Israelites differentiate between the virgins and the non-virgins? Okay. That's a question that I also wondered. So
Does this not come up in Exodus?
it does.
Whatever?
Not in Exodus, but according to Rav Kahana in Talmud Yebamot 60b, he says, they sat them on the opening of a barrel of wine. If she was a non-virgin, her breath would smell like wine. If she was a virgin, her breath did not smell like wine.
Amazing.
Yes.
That is
Wow.
That is. Oh, okay. Tomer,
Oh,
you need
that
you,
Rav
you need
Kahana.
you need to post that in r/bad women's anatomy.
I
Well,
don't
there's
use Reddit.
I have another one that's I don't know if it's
Actually, you
from
know
Rav
what? No,
Kahana
I'm
or
gonna
not.
post it. Send it to me. I'm gonna post it. It'll be great.
That reminds me of another medical concept from the Talmud, which is very similar, which is if a snake lusts after a woman and it enters her, to get it out, you put the woman on two barrels, one leg on one barrel and one leg on the other barrel, and you put a fire underneath and burn some meat, and the smell of the fire will go into her, and the snake will come out, and then you grab it with a pair of tongs and burn it in the fire. Yeah, the same book.
Yeah.
Since you're the
Well-
one keeping snakes, Aaron, did you keep notes on how to do that?
Yeah. That's advice I'm going to follow because that's a thing that happens.
Well, now you know,
I
Aaron,
give
it
up
happens.
on men. I give up.
It's a very weird concept, but it's like it's very like what's the word? When you give human attributes to something as well. It's like if I was a snake, that's what I would do.
Anthropomorphizing.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Because that's what snakes do. They enter into the womb of what they lust after. Like that's a thing.
I've actually seen once where there was a snake in some woman's ear.
Oh,
That the entire snake got into her ear. Obviously, a baby of a very small colubrid species, but there was a whole snake in her ear.
Oh.
That happened. But this other thing,
Wouldn't be for that reason anyway.
Okay, I'll continue. Kimchi proposed that they have passed the women next to the Ark of the Covenant, and it signaled to the Israelites whether a woman was a virgin or not. Butler writes, exactly how they are to make such a quick determination is left to the reader's imagination, end quote. And Nelson comments, yeah.
No, I was going to say, it sounds invasive.
Yeah,
However you do it.
it always is.
Okay, so Nelson comments, the special limitation on slaughter in order to exempt virgins, as directed in verse 11 and carried out in verse 12, echoes the battle with Midian in Numbers 31. Judges 21 verses 11 to 12 uses language employed in Numbers 31 verses 17, 18, and 35 to distinguish between Midianite women killed and those spared as wives for the victors. These women either have or have not, quote, known the bed of a male, end quote, or, quote, known a man through the bed of a male, end quote. Judges 21:11 reflects Numbers 31:18 and 35, and Judges 21:12 echoes Numbers 31:17 and 35. This is certainly an intertextual reverberation of some sort. Perhaps the judge's text is ironically offering the example from Numbers 31, which does not explicitly mention cherem as a potential justification for the cherem procedure used at Yavesh Gilead.
Does anybody say anything, Tomer, about because in verse 12, I mean, it really does feel like there's a lot of redundancy taking place here. It's na'ara betula asher lo yada, right? Like it's the young women, the virgin young women, the
Yeah.
virgin young women who have never known a man.
Yeah.
So
Mm.
yeah.
Well,
Maybe
Actually,
does protest too much, methinks.
His proof that the word betula doesn't necessarily mean virgin. It's like nara betula, and then they're like the ones that didn't know man, because you could be both of those words and have known a man.
Yeah.
Or
is
could
there
be naive.
anything? Yeah, Nelson writes, the appositional nouns young woman and virgin work together as a class noun so that the verb had not had sex, in Hebrew had not known, is singular in number. Okay, now on verse 12, the camp at Shiloh in Canaan. Kimchi is puzzled by this remark, since it is already known that Shiloh was in Canaan. Nelson and Amit write that this refers to the west side of the Jordan as opposed to Gilead to the east, seen in Joshua 14:11 and 22 verses 9 through 11. Butler notes that Gass suggested that a second, lesser-known Shiloh, which was not a major central sanctuary, is referred here. He notes, however, that it is generally accepted that there was only one Shiloh, according to Halpern and Finkelstein. Moreover, if there were two Shilohs, then the chapter distinguishes between Shiloh north of Bethel from a Shiloh either farther north or in the land of Gilead across the Jordan from the land of Canaan. If that were the case, quote, the reader would expect that Shiloh not in the land of Canaan to figure in this chapter, which it explicitly does not, end quote. He concludes, quote, the pains the narrator takes to locate and describe the site seem rather to point to an early period when Israel did not yet recognize Shiloh as a central cult place, Bethel being the major sanctuary and meeting place. Shiloh may have been a neutral site where Israel and Benjamin could meet, Israel setting up camp, not cult, there to meet Benjamin. On verse 14, there were not enough for all of them. In Hebrew, velo matz'u lahem ken, literally, and they did not find them so. Most early translations and commentators understand this phrase to mean there was not enough for them, since there were 600 Benjaminites. Septuagint has, and in this way they were content. Nelson writes that this attests either to a text without the negative particle or to a misunderstanding of the Hebrew of the Masoretic text.
So, sorry, I'm thinking back to some of Isaac's comments about the possibility of this text being a polemic against Saul at the beginning. Has anybody also connected the appearance of Jabesh Gilead in this
Yeah, it appears
story?
I did mention it. Yeah.
Did you say that? Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I missed that part.
because it's also connected to the cutting of the oxen as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. On verse 17, the Benjaminite survivors must have heirs. In Hebrew Bible reads Yerushat Pelita LeBinyamin, Pileta LeBinyamin, literally an inheritance of refuge for Benjamin. While this reading is attested by the Septuagint and Targum, the Lucianic recension reads, how can we preserve a remnant for Benjamin? Vulgate has, we must use all care and provide with great diligence that one tribe be not destroyed out of Israel. And Peshita, a remnant of Benjamin must remain. Rashi wrote that this refers to the tribe's inheritance, which remained unclaimed and is expecting the remaining survivors of Benjamin. Kimchi writes that this refers to Jacob's inheritance. Most commentators render Yerusha as survivors. Gersonides wrote that this refers to the 600 surviving troops. While Amit favors the Lusanic recension, Nelson follows the concise quote-unquote Masoretic text and Septuagint and writes that it is, quote, conveying a terse slogan or ceremonial proclamation, end quote. And Butler comments, whatever the exact translation, the text pictures Israelites recognizing the loss they have inflicted on the nation by wiping out one tribe. What is to prevent my tribe from being next? How can we face our enemies when we are fighting among ourselves and destroying ourselves? A selfish look at reality shows Israel its mistake in doing what for the moment was right in their own eyes. Bloch says, quote, the awkward construction captures the vexed emotional state of the elders, end quote. On verse
So the men are
19
getting all emotional.
Yeah, I guess.
And then Sable Eagle says, wait. Did Tomer just say that Shiloh may have been a missile site?
Did I say that? Where did I say that?
That's Silo, not Shiloh.
Shiloh, yes. Oh.
No, it was for the
I don't
chart.
understand this. Yeah. Okay, so on verse 19, there is the annual festival of the Lord in Shiloh. To what festival does this refer to? Amit notes some of the traditional commentaries. Quote, Josephus associated it with Elkanah going to Shiloh every year in 1 Samuel 1:3 and saw it as one of the 3 pilgrimage festivals. Quote, that 3 times in a year when we meet in Shiloh, our wives and our daughters accompany us. Let then the Benjaminites be allowed to steal away and marry such women as they can catch, while we will never incite them nor forbid them, end quote, in Antiquities 5:170-171. Kimchi comments, quote, it could have occurred during Passover or during Sukkot, which was a time of celebration, or during Yom Kippur, end quote. As Chazal wrote in Mishnah Ta'anit 4:8, quote, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel said, there were no days as joyous for the Jewish people as the 15th of Av and as Yom Kippur, as on them the daughters of Jerusalem would go out in white clothes, and they would dance in the vineyards, end quote. According to Pseudophilo in LAB 48:3, it refers to Passover, end quote. She proposed that it was a local harvest festival, much like the festival of Shechem in 927. On that same verse, which lies north of Bethel, east of the road, ... Niditch comments, the verbal map drawn for the location of Shiloh, 2119, is significant. The ancient cult center is situated with reference to other central northern sites. Bethel to its south, see 122, 45, 20, verses 18, 26, and 31, and Shechem to the north, see 9:2. Lebona is not mentioned elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible. Located about 3 miles northwest of Shiloh and identified with modern Luban, it too belongs to a route used for travel, trade, and perhaps for pilgrimage. Compare Exodus 34:23. In a foundation tale, such an important sacred trail emphasizes national identity and maps an important means of religious self-definition. The author thereby emphasizes that the roots of Israelite identity are ancient and deep. The literary form of the map is similar to Numbers 21, verses 11 through 20, especially material said to be quoted from the Book of the Wars of the Lord at Numbers 21, verses 14 through 15. In Numbers, the sites mark ancient borders, an equally important aspect of situating national geography and mapping group identity. The oral maps are parallelistic in the style of ancient Hebrew poetry and employ colorful descriptions of direction, for example, east of the sun. On verses 20, yeah, that's the uses.
No, it's a cute phrase.
Yeah. On verses 21 to 22, several commentators argued that the language of the verses indicates the author's criticism towards this practice. Nelson notes that the verb for abduct, chataf, in verse 21 has violent connotations, as seen in Halot and Psalms 10:9, much like the verb for seize, gazal, in verse 23. Butler notes Lapsley's opinion, quote, the word choice reflects the narrator's view that the women have been forcibly seized, plundered, robbed, and stolen, end quote. And that of Younger, quote, the rape of the daughters of Shiloh is an ironic counterpoint to the rape of the concubine, just as the campaign against Jabesh Gilead is an ironic counterpart to the war against Benjamin, end quote. Niditch compares this proposal with the Latin rape of the Sabine women, and further writes, women are manipulated, seized, and raped at the end of the cycle in Judges 19 through 21, as at the beginning of the cycle. They are the doorways through which chaos descends and order is reestablished, critical to tales of creation and foundation. The narrative is told from a male-dominated perspective, and little comfort is provided for feminist appropriation, in contrast to responses invited by the portrayal of other women in Judges, such as Achsa, Deborah, and Yael. But women are vitally important to the men's tales. There will be no Israel without them. Marginal, they are nevertheless critical portals in tales of nationhood. The author himself may reveal some embarrassment about the old stories, much as he relishes telling them. It was all so long ago when each man did what was right in his own eyes, 21:25. Yet Judges does not end with chaos. It ends with wholeness, reconciliation, rehabilitation, and peace made possible in men's eyes through the taking of women.
Critical portals.
Yeah.
Speak
Now-
friend and enter.
Men don't pass the Bechdel test.
Yeah, so you're a conduit, you're a vessel, you're a portal. Yeah. What great credit to women, because if they weren't producing more men, then there wouldn't be the Jewish nation. That's it. That's your
It's not
worth.
for Mary.
That's yeah, that's I remember my father saying that if you can't say no, like there's no ability to say yes without the ability to say no. And I think that's why a lot of us are not having children. Because we're saying no. We're done.
Yeah.
Now, on verse 22, several commentators noted the difficult grammar of this verse. Amit writes that the verse is corrupt and that most emendations and interpretations are based mainly on the context. She notes Rashi's interpretation, quote, "We were merciful with them because they did not know what to do, as we could not provide each of these men with a wife at the time of the war with Jabesh Gilead, except for 400 of them. And if it is your oath that disturbs you, there is nothing sinful here on your part, since you are not the ones who provided them with your daughters, so that you would now be blameworthy," end quote. Nelson writes that verse 22 is, quote, "a subordinate scheme for the response of Israelites when confronted by fathers and brothers," end quote. He further writes, although verse 22 is awkward to translate, context requires that the elders make 3 points. These are expressed by means of an imperative verb that is justified on the basis of 2 balanced, contrasting perfect verb clauses, each introduced by because not, ki lo. First, with the imperative, be generous to them for our sake, chanunu otam, the elders are asking the relatives to do them a gracious offer in regard to the Benjaminites. The pronoun them is masculine. Perhaps the elders are implying that their respected status warrants such exceptional courtesy. Then the 2 because not, kilo, motivations for the imperative request focus on the contrasts between take and give and we and you. We did not take enough wives in the attack on Yabesh Gilead, and you, emphatic pronoun, fathers, did not actually give your daughters. Because you did not do anything voluntarily, you are innocent of the curse. Only an outcome in which you fathers do not insist on normal marriage processes, but rather passively accept these marriages by capture, will be in everybody's interest. There also seems to be an implied threat for the fathers to insist on compensation for this fait accompli might place them under the curse as active agents. And finally, on verse 23, Butler notes that despite Benjamin's remnant being victims of holy war from their kinsfolk, they managed to retain an inherited share among the Israelite tribe. He writes that the narrator, quote, points to the long-term success of the endeavor to get wives for Benjamin, end quote. This success, however, comes as Israel's tribal leaders carry out the actions of holy war and kidnapping to make up for the damage they have inflicted on their own kinsfolk. He notes Younger's observation that the rebuilding of cities means, quote, the entire implementation of the cherem has been undercut, end quote. He quotes Ackerman, quote, what we have then in Judges 19:1 and 20 through 20:48 and 21 verses 15 to 25 is a paradox where two episodes stand paralleled within the telling of the larger Judges 19 to 21 tale, yet stand paralleled in a manner curiously askew. The result is outcomes discongruently out of sync, whereby a story that begins by condemning Benjamin's assault of an Ephraimite woman concludes by condoning the Benjaminites' ravaging of the Ephraimite women. And I'm done.
Oh God, that only makes it worse. I love how Christians say, look at things in context. The context made it worse. The context made it worse. It made it worse. It's worse.
It usually does.
Yeah. Yeah. I've noticed.
All right, so I have a question. Are we all done with Tomer's commentary?
All done. I'm done. Yeah.
Okay. All right, and so I take it we're not going to jump into Ruth today?
No.
No, but
So, but my question is, I understand that there's a choice between the Jewish Bible and the Christian Bible, and when there's a moment like this, I need to know: is it Ruth that we're going to next week?
I think we should.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Because we follow the Old Testament, and most people are familiar with it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like in
Christian
this
Bibles
panel,
are
I
just
guess.
thicker on the ground, you know?
Yeah, and I already made prepared commentaries for Ruth, and it just started on Samuel.
Yeah.
I finished the
And
commentary for Samuel
don't forget to send me your bibliography for
Your
Yeah, I will.
bibliography.
Yeah, one of
Shut
those.
up.
It's okay, Kip. He hasn't had to cite anything in his life.
The burn.
For Ruth, I'm gonna have
Shots fired.
a presentation ready for the beginning of it, an introduction to it, and I'm also gonna have more commentary for that one, because shocker, once I don't have a bunch of bullshit to work on, I get to do things I like. So
Yeah, and some of our good old traditional commentators will be back, like Ibn Ezra and Rashbam and Sfono and Ibn Kaspi. Yeah, it's gonna be good.
Kip, thank you for being on today. And
Oh, sure.
I'm looking forward to Monday.
That'll be fun.
Make Lawrence feel like a valuable contributor to the
I know I won't be a valuable contributor. I'll be there.
Just so we're clear, we're just recording that day, right?
Well, we're recording, and I was going to put it on my channel. I'm not doing it live.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So it won't be.
My
Everybody will
preference-
get to watch it on Monday.
Yeah. My preference is that we do these things for most of the interviews that I do, in case something has to be edited, because sometimes it happens. Sometimes a guest will say, "Hey, can we edit this out?" And if it's live, obviously you can't. So I've had a couple of times people have said, "Well, can you take this down so we can?" Well, okay, fine. We'll just better to pre-record, and then when we're good at the end, then I can make it public.
No, that's good.
Okay. All right. Anybody else have anything to say before we close up?
I should have a ancient Christian commentary prepared. I just saw something. Yeah.
what?
An ancient Christian commentary. Yeah, so Basil the Great, he writes that applied to present circumstances, that there was no king in Israel is understood to mean that quarreling and discord in the church is a result of turning away from the one true God and King of the universe. Good night, everybody.
No, totally what I meant. Yep. Make sure you join the Discord.
Yes.
You should definitely do that. Everyone's in there.
Yes.
Even Aaron. He's technically
symbolically
there.
there.
There is an
I was
account that is
going to say I've never seen
Nominally.
it.
Okay. Thank you much, everyone.